Hey guys! We're embarking on a journey into one of history's most extraordinary feats of survival and ingenuity. We'll uncover how Native Americans engineered the teepee, a dwelling so sophisticated it provided warmth and comfort in temperatures that would send modern humans into a panic, all because the thermostat dipped a mere 3 degrees. So, before you settle in, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely appreciate the content I share here. And do let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always incredible to connect with our global audience. Now, dim the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for that subtle background hum, and let's gently ease into tonight's exploration. When you envision a home robust enough to withstand winters at minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of soul-numbing cold that makes your very eyelashes question their existence, you might conjure images of something imposing, heavily fortified, and aggressively unwelcoming. Think massive stone walls, minuscule windows, and a fireplace so cavernous it practically qualifies as an extra resident. Essentially, a medieval fortress stripped of its grandeur. Yet, the indigenous peoples who not only endured but truly flourished in these brutal conditions weren't confined to stoic stone cubes. They lived in tipis, elegant, aerodynamically brilliant structures that, while appearing simple from afar, are secretly far more intelligently designed than many buildings we construct today. And let me be perfectly clear, tipis are woefully underrated. Had Europeans conceived of such a marvel, they would have composed entire operas in its honor. There would be grand paintings titled Ode to the Perfect Cone, and comprehensive architectural curricula devoted to the sacred geometry of portable warmth. Following this orientation, the second crucial element was the ingenious door flap, a robust hide covering that functioned as a surprisingly effective yet remarkably flexible shield. This versatile flap could be effortlessly lifted, securely tied back, carefully weighted, or even doubled and layered depending on the specific demands of the season. Critically, unlike an unyielding wooden door that would merely resist the wind, this pliable flap moved with the gusts, cleverly preventing structural stress and significantly diminishing the likelihood of icy air aggressively barging inside uninvited. During the ferocious intensity of harsh winter storms, a secondary flap or supplementary insulation could be strategically added behind the main door, effectively creating a miniature airlock system. This two-layer design masterfully trapped cold air within its confines before it could penetrate the main living space, performing the identical function of modern vestibules, yet accomplishing it without any reliance on power strips, electric heaters, or those often awkward, "Please close both doors" signs. Just inside the entrance, the teepee's interior lining further contributed to its thermal integrity. While this lining didn't extend directly to the doorway, its strategic presence expertly redirected any incoming cold air downward, effectively precluding it from sweeping aggressively into the main living space. Any rogue gust that somehow managed to bypass the door flap was immediately forced to behave, skillfully diverted into the teepee's sophisticated airflow system, where it seamlessly integrated into the natural convection rather than manifesting as an unwelcome blast of Arctic chill. A further ingenious detail was the intentionally low height of the doorway itself. Admittingly, this design necessitated a slight bend or crouch when entering and exiting. While Joel was a period brimming with warmth and spirited celebration within the safety of the longhouse, the world outside was believed to be far more capricious and unpredictable. Winter nights were steeped in profound mysteries, and the Vikings acutely felt that the boundaries between mortal and supernatural realms became considerably thinner during this potent season. One of the most dramatic and enduring beliefs tied to Joel was the Wild Hunt, a roaring, spectral procession said to sweep across the sky, led by none other than Odin himself. And honestly, if you've ever stood outside during a violent winter storm, feeling the wind tear past you like the thundering gallop of hooves, it's not difficult to grasp the origins of this powerful idea. The Wild Hunt was a captivating paradox, awe-inspiring, terrifying, and strangely comforting all at once. Odin, astride his magnificent 8-legged steed, Sleipnir, was joined by the spirits of slain warriors, restless specters, and sometimes even fearsome mythic beasts. To witness it was considered perilous. To ignore it, utterly foolish. People stayed indoors, whispering fervent prayers and hoping the furious host would pass by without claiming anyone. Personally, I find this belief utterly fascinating because it profoundly reflects how the Vikings interpreted the raw power of nature. Storms weren't merely weather phenomena. They were messages, dire warnings, or palpable displays of divine power. But the wild hunt wasn't the sole supernatural occurrence linked to Joel. Many Vikings believed that ancestral spirits returned during this sacred time, drawn by the warmth of the hearth and the offerings thoughtfully left in their honor. Families would set aside food, drink, or even a spare seat near the fire. Tabernae also served as vital social hubs. Laborers would gather to discuss wages, gamblers would passionately argue over dice games, and street philosophers would loudly espouse their views to any who would listen, or simply couldn't escape. It was a messy, crowded, and bordering on unhygienic environment, but it was precisely where life vividly unfolded. Deals were struck, boisterous fights occasionally erupted, and genuine friendships were often forged over steaming bowls of stew. And always lurking somewhere in the background were the ever-present thieves. A distracted eater made for easy prey, and the dense crowds provided effortless means of escape. In the final estimation, the taberna was far more than a place to merely eat. It was where the very pulse of the city could be distinctly felt, tasted, and smelled. Rome may have governed an empire, but it survived one bowl of street stew at a time. If one truly desires to comprehend the vibrant tapestry of Roman street life, the focus should not rest upon the grand architectural marvels. Instead, one must look to the vendors, for they constituted the authentic soundtrack of the city. Their voices, a constant chorus of shouting prices, effusively praising their wares, vociferously insulting competitors, and employing every tactic short of physical combat to seize customers' attention, define the urban soundscape. Honestly, I believe Roman vendors would shame modern salespeople into silence. They operated without microphones, without advertisements, without neon signs, relying solely on lungs powerful enough, I imagine, to terrify birds from the trees. Each vendor honed a specific strategy. Fish sellers would boast incessantly about the freshness of their catch, even as the unmistakable aroma suggested otherwise. Fruit vendors would meticulously stack their figs in precise, appealing pyramids, understanding that presentation, however fleeting, could mean everything. But because this profound ingenuity originated from indigenous nations, a startling number of historical accounts merely shrug and dismiss it as a kind of tent. A tent? That's akin to describing a NASA spacecraft as an ambitious metal canoe. From the outside, a tipi presents a clean, minimalist aesthetic, the sort of design that graces Pinterest boards under off-grid living goals. But every single curve and angle of its form is a testament to generations who meticulously observed the land, discerning precisely how wind, snow, and temperature behaved. This wasn't guesswork. It was deeply ingrained knowledge. Meanwhile, European settlers on the plains were erecting flimsy square cabins that trapped smoke indoors, seemingly intent on hotboxing themselves into the afterlife. What truly astonishes me is the tipi's seamless integration with its environment. It doesn't attempt to resist the wind. It elegantly cleaves through it. It doesn't strive to bear the weight of snow. It simply shrugs it off, much like a buffalo shaking off a bad morning. Modern houses, in stark contrast, are practically paralyzed by a single snowflake, instantly panicking about potential roof damage. The tipi's unspoken retort? Asterisk cute. Try harder. Asterisk, and frankly, I find that utterly admirable. It's pure architectural confidence. Here's my personal assessment. The tipi just might be one of the most ingenious human inventions ever conceived. It's portable, insulated, naturally ventilated, wonderfully warm in winter, refreshingly cool in summer, simple to repair, and easy to relocate. Even IKEA furniture struggles to match that impressive list, and IKEA furniture, let's be honest, often comes with assembly instructions that read like a ransom note. The tipi wasn't merely a place of shelter. It was a sophisticated survival machine, perfectly adapted, perfectly efficient, and perfectly suited to a world that relentlessly tried to sculpt you into a decorative ice figurine. However, faced with the stark choice between maintaining a dignified upright posture and risking severe hypothermia, the vast majority wisely prioritized warmth over mere elegance. This low aperture played a crucial role in minimizing the escape of significant volumes of precious warm air each time someone moved in or out. In summary, the teepee's entrance design masterfully transformed what might conventionally be perceived as a structural vulnerability into an undeniable functional strength. Far from being a mere aperture in the hide, it was an elaborately engineered barrier, robustly designed to withstand and repel the harshest assaults winter could unleash. In a climate where a single, poorly managed draft possessed the power to entirely ruin a night's rest, the teepee door didn't simply exclude the cold. It proactively preserved and amplified the interior comfort. To step inside a meticulously constructed winter teepee when the external temperature hovered around -30 degrees Celsius was akin to entering an astonishing plot twist. One intuitively braced for profound suffering, for eyelashes to instantly crystallize with frost, for a bone-chilling cold that seemed to compel one's very skeletal structure to file formal grievances. Instead, what greeted the senses was an unexpected, profound warmth, a genuine, enveloping heat, coupled with a level of comfort that would have left many European settlers of the era staring in stunned silence, inevitably followed by the quiet, internal acknowledgement that their approach to dwelling had been fundamentally misguided. A winter teepee transcended the basic function of merely blocking out the cold. It actively engineered an entire interior microclimate. Whether these gestures were meant literally or purely symbolically, they powerfully emphasized the enduring connection between the living and the dead, a vital reminder that identity stretched far beyond a single lifetime. Some households practiced specific rituals for house spirits, the dessert or landvetter, believing that honoring them maintained essential harmony within the home. I personally appreciate how balanced this worldview is. Instead of perceiving spirits solely as threats, the Vikings often viewed them as partners, guardians of place, memory, and family fortune. The night sky itself transformed into part of this mythic landscape. Strange lights, intense storms, and dramatically shifting clouds were interpreted as significant signs. The northern lights, which we now understand scientifically, were widely seen by many as shimmering reflections of Valkyries riding to battle. And honestly, I can't blame them. If you lacked a scientific explanation and witnessed the heavens ignite with dazzling, shimmering green fire, the image of warrior maidens riding across the sky would probably feel like a perfectly reasonable interpretation. In these deep-seated beliefs, Joel transcended a mere seasonal festival. It became a profound cosmic drama, a powerful reminder that humans were never truly alone in the depths of the winter dark. As winter slowly began to loosen its icy grip and the days gradually stretched towards the promise of spring, the profound spirit of Joel lingered. For the Vikings, this festival was far more than just a moment of celebration. It was a profound philosophical statement about the very essence of endurance. And honestly, I think this is precisely why Joel continues to captivate us today. It wasn't founded on luxury or material abundance. Instead, it was built upon the bedrock of scarcity, indomitable resilience, and the fundamental human need to create light in the darkest of times. Olive merchants would tempt customers with a sample or two, then masterfully guilt-trip them into purchasing an entire bowl. Bakers would proudly display their warm, fragrant loaves like newfound treasure, allowing the enticing steam to dramatically rise into the air. And the spice merchants, they were the true tricksters of the market, audaciously claiming their imported pepper hailed from distant India when it most likely originated from a warehouse just down the street. Prices were never immutable. Haggling was not just expected, it was an integral part of the daily ritual. A seller would initiate with an absurdly high demand, the customer would counter with an insultingly low offer, and the entire negotiation would swiftly transform into a theatrical performance. Curious passers-by would pause to watch for entertainment, while children often placed bets on the outcome. In Rome, purchasing food was emphatically not a mere transaction. It was a captivating piece of street theater. Of course, vendors were not only loud, they were fiercely territorial. A newcomer daring to set up too close could ignite a furious shouting match or, in some memorable instances, a full-blown brawl with bread rolls serving as impromptu projectiles. Honestly, I would gladly pay good money to witness a Roman bakery fight. Many vendors were former slaves who had purchased their freedom or ambitious immigrants from the provinces, striving to carve out a living in the empire's busiest metropolis. Their stalls often reflected their diverse backgrounds. Greeks offered honey cakes, Syrians presented sesame treats, and Egyptians prepared spiced beans. Rome, for all its chaos, was also surprisingly cosmopolitan. In a single bustling street, one could literally taste half the Mediterranean world. Yet, beneath the vibrant colors and ceaseless noise lay a palpable desperation. Vendors had to sell sufficient goods each day merely to survive the next. There were no safety nets, no guaranteed wages. And that, my friends, is precisely why those inside a teepee endured, while winter outside shrieked like it was auditioning for a horror film. Before a teepee could manifest as the warm, elegant winter powerhouse it required a robust skeleton, and not the kind you decorate for Halloween. It demanded poles, long, straight, and exceptionally strong. Fortuitously, the Great Plains offered the ideal timber for this task: the lodgepole pine. This tree was so perfectly suited for teepee construction that one might suspect nature itself was showing off. Let's briefly delve into these remarkable poles. They were tall, slender, surprisingly lightweight, and incredibly durable, essentially the supermodels of the arboreal world. If you've ever labored to drag a colossal wooden beam across an open field, you'll know that lightweight and durable are rarely found in the same sentence. Yet, lodgepole pines achieved this feat with apparent ease. Honestly, trees probably shouldn't be allowed to possess such unfairly good genetics. The selection process for these poles was anything but arbitrary. People didn't just wander into the forest, dramatically point, and exclaim, "That one!" They possessed an intimate understanding of precisely which trees would serve their purpose and which would not. And here's where I offer a personal observation. This is where indigenous engineering truly humbles modern sensibilities. Most of us struggle to select a ripe avocado without experiencing existential dread. Yet these communities chose structural materials with an almost mathematical precision and confidence. Once harvested and prepared, the poles were meticulously arranged into a tripod, the very bedrock of the teepee. This tripod was neither wobbly nor experimental. It wasn't a tentative, "let's hope this holds" arrangement. No, it was engineered for such formidable stability that it could withstand winter winds capable of knocking the personality clean out of a buffalo. The sophisticated interplay between its robust buffalo hide exterior, the expertly insulated inner lining, the warmth emanating from the central hearth, and the meticulously managed airflow ensured an interior temperature so remarkably comfortable that occupants routinely shed their outer layers, worked unimpeded, and slept soundly without the desperate shivering of a poorly wrapped burrito. This extraordinary degree of environmental mastery, achieved without the aid of metal stoves, electric heaters, or mountainous stacks of firewood the size of a small village, stands as one of the most profoundly impressive achievements in indigenous engineering. Within this protected sphere, light emanated softly from the central hearth, its warm, flickering glow filtering gently through the hide covering to suffuse the entire space with a rich, amber hue. It was akin to selecting the most inviting, cozy lighting option on a smart bulb, except here the bulb was one's entire, carefully designed home. Shadows performed a gentle ballet along the curved walls, crafting a hypnotic, flickering atmosphere perfectly conducive to the age-old traditions of storytelling, the patient imparting of knowledge, the meticulous crafting of tools, or simply the serene passing of time as the external world diligently attempted to freeze itself solid. Storage solutions were elegantly integrated. Tools, bags, and personal belongings hung neatly from the teepee poles, kept clear of the ground. This deliberate organization not only maximized usable space but also played a crucial role in maintaining optimal airflow around the inner walls, thereby preserving the efficient convection system that rendered the teepee so remarkably effective. The interior never felt cluttered or cramped. Instead, it was a space shaped with profound intentionality, not merely an accidental accumulation of objects haphazardly vying for territory. A description, let's be honest, that sadly fits many modern living rooms. What makes Joel especially compelling is the way it remarkably evolved. After Christianity spread across Scandinavia, many ancient pagan customs blended seamlessly into the emerging Christmas traditions. The timing of the festival, the communal feasts, the symbolic fires, and even the cherished idea of gift-giving all found new homes within a Christian framework. Yet, the old meanings didn't simply vanish. They subtly hid beneath the surface, deeply shaping the rich textures of winter celebrations throughout Northern Europe. Personally, I find this cultural blending absolutely beautiful. Rather than erasing the past, new traditions layered themselves thoughtfully on top, allowing people to carry forward both their old and new identities. Take the Yule log, for instance. Today, we might think of it as a delightful dessert or a decorative fireplace ritual, but its roots stretch back to Viking households feeding a massive wooden trunk into the hearth to keep a symbolic flame alive for days on end. Or consider the boar's head, once central to Freyr's sacrifice, now faintly echoed in medieval English feasting customs. Even the fundamental idea of gathering, drinking, sharing stories, and reaffirming vital bonds during the darkest days of winter remains essentially unchanged. Humans still deeply crave warmth and companionship when the world feels cold and unforgiving. The persistence of these traditions vividly demonstrates how profoundly Joel resonated with the innate rhythms of human life. At its core, it was about hope, a universal concept that every culture understands. The Vikings didn't celebrate because life was easy. They celebrated precisely because life was hard. And in my opinion, that is the most powerful kind of celebration imaginable. It's defiant. It's emotional. It's a poignant reminder that joy isn't the opposite of struggle. It's precisely how people fight against it. Illness meant no income. Bad weather translated into hungry children. The glamour of Rome, in many respects, rested squarely on the backs of these individuals who hustled from dawn to dusk, fervently praying they sold enough olives, wine, or fish before the day's fortunes turned sour. And yet, despite the relentless struggle, these tireless vendors kept the sprawling city fed. Without them, Rome's million residents simply could not have functioned. Markets were not just places of commerce. They were vital lifelines, and the vendors were the tenacious individuals holding the city together, one shouted sale at a time. Stepping into a Roman market at midday was an experience where your stomach inevitably dictated decisions before your brain could even process them. The heady aroma of sizzling meat, frying dough, and richly spiced chickpeas permeated the air so thickly that even the gods on Olympus might have felt a twinge of culinary jealousy. Rome was fundamentally a city that ran on street food, not primarily out of a love for convenience, but because the vast majority of its inhabitants possessed no kitchens in their own homes. And frankly, I believe the Romans perfected the concept of grab-and-go millennia before it became a fashionable modern trend. Vendors expertly cooked their offerings on portable braziers, sending fragrant curls of smoke wafting into the hot, dusty streets. The most sought-after meals were simple yet bursting with flavor. Grilled sausages tucked into fresh bread, hearty lentil stews, wholesome barley porridge, fried fish, sweet stuffed dates coated in honey, and roasted nuts. Romans were generally not particular gourmands. If it filled your belly and didn't induce immediate poisoning, it was deemed perfectly acceptable. One of the greatest crowd-pleasers was the food from a thermopolium, the ancient equivalent of a bustling fast food counter. And truly, if your home can remain upright in a plain storm, you unequivocally deserve a medal. After the foundational tripod was firmly established, the remaining poles were artfully placed around it in a precise spiral pattern. This arrangement wasn't merely for aesthetic appeal, though it undeniably looked magnificent. The spiral served several critical functions. It distributed weight evenly, allowed snow to gracefully glide off, and formed a cage-like structure robust enough to resist even the fiercest gusts. This is the caliber of engineering modern stadiums boast about, yet the Tipi achieved it first, without steel, without computers, and without architectural firms charging exorbitant consultation fees. And here's a crucial detail often overlooked. Lodgepole pine poles were reused for years, even decades. They journeyed with families from camp to camp, through winter and summer, across vast hunting grounds and seasonal sites. Imagine a house with reusable walls that don't disintegrate 5 minutes after assembly, a concept IKEA users can only dream of. In essence, the lodgepole pine was more than just a tree. It was the structural backbone of the plains home, a perfect architectural gift from the environment. And candidly, modern construction could learn an immense amount from those enduring poles. The teepee's iconic cone shape might appear deceptively simple, almost too simple, but that's an intrinsic part of its evil genius design. It embodies a kind of architectural brilliance that subtly conceals itself behind an effortless elegance. You might glance at it and think, oh, a nice triangle. But then winter descends, the temperature plummets to -30 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind shrieks across the plains like it's desperately late for an apocalyptic appointment. Suddenly, that unassuming triangle is performing miracles. Let's begin with the obvious. A cone is inherently aerodynamic. A teepee doesn't engage in a futile battle with the wind. It doesn't argue with it. Around the outer perimeter, sleeping areas were thoughtfully arranged in a circular formation, generously layered with additional hides and furs for supreme insulation. These designated rest spots consistently remained discernibly warmer than the central walkway, a testament to the synergistic operation of the floor system and the expertly managed heated airflow. Families could thus retreat to peaceful slumber, enveloped in profound warmth, even as blizzards raged outside with the boisterous, unsettling enthusiasm of a choir of disgruntled wolves. What might truly astonish a contemporary audience is the sheer degree of livability and richness this space afforded. This was far from mere bare minimum survival. This was genuine living. Cooking meals, meticulously repairing garments, skillfully crafting tools, joyfully singing, intimately sharing stories, patiently teaching lessons, and carefully preparing sustenance. Daily life unfolded seamlessly within, utterly unfazed by the ferocious, howling cold that dominated the world beyond the teepee walls. Ultimately, the winter teepee did more than simply shield its occupants from the environment. It actively forged a sanctuary, a vibrant bubble of warmth, comfort, and community, in a world that relentlessly demanded resilience. It was a true home where the rich tapestry of life persisted, unyielding, even as winter expended its every formidable effort to halt it. When European settlers first encountered these sophisticated winter teepees, their initial reaction often mirrored the bewilderment one experiences upon realizing an expensive, cutting-edge smartphone fails at a task a simple, older model performs effortlessly. This typically progressed through stages of confusion, then outright denial, and finally a grudging, reluctant respect. Today, when we light candles, gather with cherished loved ones, or tell old stories beside a winter fire, we are echoing impulses that are thousands of years old. We may no longer fear that the sun will disappear forever, but the instinct to push back against the encroaching darkness remains as strong as ever. And that, more than anything, is the lasting legacy of Joel, a festival that taught people not just to survive the winter, but to profoundly transform it into something meaningful, deeply communal, and quintessentially human. To most people standing outside its imposing walls, a medieval castle appeared to be a bastion of serene power. Thick stone battlements, soaring towers, and a noble banner fluttering confidently overhead all projected an image of unshakable authority. Yet, anyone who actually resided within those walls, especially the guards, knew the stark truth. A castle was anything but a peaceful sanctuary. It was, in reality, a high-pressure environment meticulously engineered for war, rampant paranoia, and a state of perpetual readiness. And honestly, I believe castle guards endured one of the most stressful professions in the entire medieval world. They weren't merely protecting a structure. They were safeguarding a potent symbol of authority, immense wealth, and political pride. This meant that even a single lapse in judgment was an unaffordable luxury. A guard's day typically commenced long before sunrise. While the castle kitchen slowly stirred to life and craftsmen began preparing their tools, the guards were already diligently checking their gear, tightening straps, sharpening blades, and reporting for inspection. The castle constable or a ranking sergeant meticulously oversaw assignments, determining who would patrol the bustling courtyard, who would keep watch from the towering walls, who would stand guard at the crucial gatehouse, and who would be dispatched to the highest towers. These establishments featured stone counters embedded with large jars, each brimming with hot dishes kept warm by coals underneath. You would approach, point to something bubbling enticingly, and a ladle full of it would swiftly land in your bowl. Personally, I think thermopolia deserve far more recognition. They were, in essence, the direct ancestors of every modern food stall, diner, and street cart rolled into one ingenious package. And then, of course, there was the wine. Cheap, often sour, almost always watered down, and frequently flavored with various herbs. A cup cost barely anything. This affordability likely explains why a significant portion of the city found themselves slightly tipsy by afternoon. But considering the relentless stress of Roman street life, I can't honestly fault them for seeking such a modest escape. Naturally, with every good thing came an element of danger. Food regulations were non-existent. Vendors reused cooking oil until it turned an alarming black hue. Fish might languish in the scorching sun for far longer than any reasonable person would tolerate. Meat skewers were sometimes comprised of more bone than actual meat. I'm convinced that surviving Roman cuisine demanded a digestive system forged in fire. The truly unlucky fell ill. The truly experienced simply shrugged, accepted their fate, and kept eating. Yet, the true allure of Roman street food wasn't merely its taste. It was the intoxicating atmosphere it created. Crowds constantly jostled, cooks bellowed orders, children openly begged for scraps, and musicians played for meager coins. The aromatic blend of spices like cumin and coriander gracefully drifted through the pervading chaos. Food served as a powerful connector, uniting everyone. Slaves, freedmen, citizens, foreigners, beggars, soldiers, and merchants alike. In a world where life was unpredictable and often brutally harsh, street food offered something consistent, comforting, and profoundly communal. It doesn't stubbornly insist on being a rigid rectangle, like its European counterparts. Instead, it simply leans back as if to say, "Do your worst," while the wind glides effortlessly up and over it, dismissed with quiet authority. I've long held the conviction that if European colonists had arrived with less architectural hubris and a greater willingness to observe, they would have gazed upon the teepee and immediately grasped, "Ah, so that's how you avoid freezing to death." But no, they erected boxes, cold boxes, smoky boxes, boxes that bled heat as if attempting to cool an entire continent. Meanwhile, the teepee, fashioned from little more than poles and hides, performed with the grace and efficiency of a structure possessing a PhD in aerodynamics. One of the cone shape's most impressive attributes is its unparalleled ability to shed snow. Snow doesn't accumulate politely on its roof. It slides right off. This inherent design prevents the teepee from collapsing under immense weight and effectively creates a built-in, self-maintaining system. There's no need to clamber onto your roof with a shovel, scream into the void, and lament your decision to live in such an unforgiving climate. The teepee simply takes care of itself. The unique shape also profoundly influences heat distribution. Warm air naturally rises, and inside a teepee, it circulates in a gentle spiraling motion, upward through the center, then gracefully cascading downward along the interior walls. The magnificent result? Uniform heating throughout, eliminating frigid corners and banishing those unwelcome cold drafts that might otherwise stab you in the kidneys while you sleep. I certainly cannot make the same claim for the vast majority of modern apartments. And let's not overlook its remarkable stability. A teepee is capable of weathering storms that would tear a colonial house apart with the ease of a toddler unwrapping a gift. Until then, most Europeans rigidly adhered to the notion that a proper house necessitated massive timber, ponderously thick walls, tiny, restrictive windows, and an internal atmosphere so thick with smoke that every meal inadvertently acquired the flavor of an accidental barbecue. The teepee, through its very existence, subtly but profoundly challenged these assumptions, then systematically proceeded to outperform such European dwellings in virtually every critical metric relevant to surviving minus 30-degree conditions. Consider, for instance, the archetypal settler cabin. Hastily constructed, frequently with a profound lack of understanding regarding the nuances of the local climate, these cabins were notorious for possessing gaps between their logs expansive enough to function as permanent, albeit unwelcome, entry points for the piercing winds. Their roofs were prone to incessant leaking. Chimneys often billowed smoke inward. Floors remained perpetually frozen. and the wind serenaded through the walls with the unnerving judgment of a perpetually disappointed dinner guest. Each winter, families within these structures inevitably uncovered novel and increasingly distressing reasons to lament their architectural choices. Now, juxtapose this with the winter teepee. Inherently aerodynamic, supremely insulated, effortlessly portable, perfectly breathable, consistently warm, and structurally fluid. The teepee made no attempt to belligerently wrestle with the forces of the wind. Instead, it ingeniously redirected them. It never trapped smoke inside to the point where half the family coughed themselves into an uneasy slumber. Rather, it vented cleanly and efficiently through an intelligently adjustable system. And crucially, it never buckled or collapsed under the immense burden of heavy snowfall. Instead, it shed the accumulating weight so gracefully and effortlessly that even the law of gravity itself seemed utterly impressed. Rotations were vital. Too much monotony could induce dangerous fatigue, while too much excitement often bred carelessness. In my opinion, it's truly impressive how astutely medieval commanders understood human behavior, long before the formal study of psychology even existed. Inside the castle walls, a guard needed to be both conspicuous and acutely alert. Every merchant, every messenger, every visitor, or even a wandering servant represented a potential threat. Even residents of the castle itself were not entirely above suspicion. Guards vigilantly watched for unusual behavior, late-night prowling, or anyone lingering too close to restricted areas. More than one medieval plot was ultimately thwarted because a sharp-eyed guard noticed something that simply didn't appear right. Meals were eaten swiftly and often while standing. Training drills were a regular occurrence. Archery practice, weapon handling, formation exercises, and rapid emergency responses to alarms. A guard never truly relaxed. He simply existed in varying states of readiness. And unlike the knights who rode into battle, often covered in honor and glory, guards were expected to perform their duties without any fanfare. If everything proceeded correctly, no one offered praise. If anything went awry, everyone promptly blamed them. But the undeniable truth is that castles depended on these men far more profoundly than they did on their celebrated knights. Guards were the steady hands who maintained peace, meticulously watched the gates, and upheld constant vigilance during the long stretches of quiet when danger felt distant but never truly dissipated. Their lives were a delicate balance of routine, strict discipline, and the ever-present knowledge that even the calmest day could tragically turn deadly in an instant. If a castle truly possessed a front line during peacetime, it was unequivocally the gatehouse. It provided flavor and sustenance to the daily struggle for existence and kept the vast city alive, one sizzling skewer at a time. If the stately Roman Forum represented the political brain of the vast empire, then its vibrant street markets were undoubtedly its beating, chaotic heart. To merely walk through one was to willingly surrender your senses completely. Sight, sound, and smell, all were assailed and overwhelmed simultaneously. Honestly, I believe a modern time traveler would last perhaps 5 minutes before desperately begging for earplugs and a breath of fresh, unpolluted air. The sheer noise would strike first. Vendors relentlessly yelled prices. Bakers vociferously declared that their bread was still warm, and fishmongers shrieked over each other, desperately trying to convince customers their catch had just arrived fresh from Ostia, even though everyone secretly knew half the fish had spent the night in a bucket of questionable water. Add to this cacophony the laughter and cries of children, the braying of donkeys, the barking of dogs, and the occasional rambling pronouncements of a drunkard pontificating on politics, and you were immersed in a soundscape that would make modern city traffic seem utterly peaceful by comparison. Then came the crowds. People did not navigate in orderly straight lines. Instead, they flowed like an unpredictable river, a churning mass of humanity. One moment you might find yourself tightly squeezed between two women expertly balancing baskets on their heads. The next, a legionary would cut a path directly through the middle of the street, acting as if he owned the entire thoroughfare, which, to be fair, Romans rather believed soldiers did. Personally, I think navigating Roman markets deserves recognition as an Olympic sport. Dodging handcarts, carefully stepping over spilled olives, adroitly avoiding errant chickens, your reflexes had to be razor sharp. The cone-shaped structure masterfully channels stress downward through its poles, anchoring it firmly into the ground. This intelligent design is precisely why tipis flex, bend, and ultimately survive, rather than simply breaking. A building, at its most brilliant, doesn't need to conquer nature. It needs to harmoniously cooperate with it. A fundamental truth humans too often forget. Here's my personal take. If the cone shape had originated in Europe, architects today would still be relentlessly bragging about it. There would be grand statues, elaborate parades, and even a national holiday dedicated to the holy cone of structural integrity. But indigenous nations quietly, efficiently, and beautifully perfected it, not for accolades, but for the fundamental purpose of survival. And in that crucial objective, the cone unequivocally delivered. Once the tipi's wooden skeleton stood proudly against the plain's relentless wind, resembling the world's most stoic and intimidating tripod, it was time for its covering, and not just any material would suffice. No flimsy cloth, no sad colonial canvas. No, we hope this works fabric. Tipis were clad in buffalo hides, one of nature's greatest winter inventions, and, frankly, superior insulation to much of what modern outdoor stores hawk at exorbitant prices. Let me be explicit. Buffalo hides weren't chosen out of mere convenience. They were chosen because they were, in a word, perfect. A buffalo is essentially a walking furnace, encased in dense fur and muscle, effortlessly enduring winters so brutal that even the snow itself might contemplate relocating. If an animal can casually shrug off -30 degrees Fahrenheit as if it were a mild autumn day, its hide is indisputably the ultimate material you desire enveloping your home. The intricate process of sewing these hides together was an art form in itself. Even in terms of heating efficiency, the tipi held a decided advantage. A single, modest fire within its central hearth was sufficient to thoroughly warm the entire interior, utilizing fuel with astonishing economy. Concurrently, European settlers found themselves reliant on veritable mountains of firewood, stacks so immense they could almost serve as defensive fortifications, simply to maintain their dwellings at a temperature marginally above outright Arctic misery. They would laboriously spend entire days incessantly chopping, stacking, and fretting over whether their supply would suffice, all while the tipi's inhabitants serenely tended a small, efficient fire and seamlessly continued with the rhythm of their daily lives. Then, of course, there was the revolutionary concept of mobility, an idea utterly alien to the established norms of European architecture. Once a settler cabin was erected, it became irrevocably wedded to that specific plot of land, for better or, more often, for considerably worse during the brutal seasons. Should vital hunting patterns shift or essential water sources relocate, the unfortunate reality was, too bad. The house remained stubbornly fixed, while the family faced the grim prospect of freezing. The tipi, in powerful contrast, could be effortlessly dismantled, efficiently transported, and swiftly re-erected in an entirely new location, frequently with greater speed than a settler could even manage to locate a replacement axe handle. The starkest difference, however, lay in how each structure fundamentally engaged with its environment. Settler houses stubbornly battled nature, suffering repeated and often devastating losses. The tipi, conversely, partnered with nature, adapting and thriving. Ultimately, one was not merely a shelter. It was an elegantly evolved system, exquisitely perfected for the demanding conditions of the plains. The other, a cumbersome wooden box, perpetually brimming with profound regrets. This pivotal structure, often understated in cinematic portrayals, represented the most strategically critical choke point in the entire fortress. Every single person, every cart, every animal, and every whispered piece of news had to pass through its formidable defenses. And honestly, I believe gatehouse duty was simultaneously the most fascinating and the most nerve-wracking assignment a guard could possibly receive. You were, in essence, the castle's primary filter, the discerning arbiter deciding what entered its world and what remained steadfastly outside. The gatehouse was far more than a mere doorway. It was an armored gauntlet. Guards stood positioned on multiple levels, observing the surroundings from narrow arrow slits, lofty tower windows, and protective parapets. Beneath them lay the infamous murder holes, small openings in the ceiling designed to unleash boiling water, searing hot sand, or heavy stones upon intruders in the event of an assault. And yes, despite persistent modern myths, hot oil was rarely used due to its exorbitant cost. Personally, I find this practical detail quite humorous. Even in the grim reality of medieval warfare, practicality consistently trumped drama. At ground level, the main gate itself was heavily reinforced with robust iron bands and further secured by a massive portcullis, a spiked metal grid that could slam down in mere seconds. The guard entrusted with operating the winch had to be absolutely reliable. With a single pull of a rope or the release of a lever, he held the immense power to grant entry, trap intruders, or completely seal off the castle. The sheer power and responsibility vested in him were enormous. Daily activity at the gatehouse was equally intense. As travelers arrived, guards meticulously interrogated them. "Who are you? Where do you hail from? What is your purpose here?" The smells layered themselves like a complex perfume gone horribly, wonderfully wrong. The fresh aroma of ripe fruit intertwined with the faint scent of rotting produce, the savory richness of hot stew mixed with animal manure, and the sharp tang of sweat blended with the exotic incense hawked by traveling Syrians. Rome simply smelled like life, death, food, tireless labor, and raw ambition, all blended into one unforgettable, potent aroma. In a strange way, I find myself admiring it. Romans did not strive for sterility. They embraced the glorious mess because it was undeniably honest. And within this vibrant chaos, moments of pure, unadulterated street theater frequently erupted. An argument over the price of figs could escalate into a street-wide shouting match, drawing fascinated spectators. A random musician might decide today was the day to perform a spirited tune. The air buzzed with anticipation. It was the day a new instrument would make its debut. A captivating storyteller began weaving tales of legendary heroes, only for his voice to be swallowed whole by the clatter of a passing cart laden with amphorae. In this market, every second brought a fresh surge of activity. Yet, beneath the overwhelming cacophony and endless motion, the marketplace possessed a discernible rhythm, almost like a breathing entity. For the Romans, this vibrant chaos wasn't merely tolerable. It was utterly essential for survival. It sustained them with food, offered employment, provided entertainment, and intricately wove their lives together. Indeed, Roman markets were undeniably loud, undeniably dirty, and utterly exhausting. But crucially, they were also pulsing with life, profoundly social, and brimming with an undeniable human energy. In my view, these markets were the closest embodiment of a city's soul in the ancient world, raw, unfiltered, and intensely alive. It wasn't a haphazard grab a needle and hope for the best endeavor. It demanded immense skill, profound patience, and techniques refined over countless generations. The hides were meticulously softened, expertly shaped, and painstakingly stitched using sinew, a material that was incredibly durable, remarkably flexible, and far superior to most modern threads available today. I personally believe that modern sewing tools would weep openly if they witnessed the sheer capabilities of sinew. You could practically lasso a small car with that stuff. Once stitched, the covering transformed into a single massive sheet, a winter cloak so grand it would shame any medieval king. Draping this immense cover over the tipi was neither chaotic nor improvised. It followed a precise, choreographed sequence, aligning the seams with such meticulousness that wind flowed over them, rather than penetrating through them. These were the subtle, critical details that eluded European understanding. They believed homes demanded thick logs, rigid bricks, and fervent prayers. Meanwhile, native nations were expertly crafting an aerodynamic, supremely insulated, weatherproof masterpiece using nothing more than hides and an unparalleled depth of knowledge. One of my absolute favorite aspects is the hide covering's inherent adaptability, transcending mere functionality. In the depths of winter, additional hides could be strategically added for enhanced insulation. In the warmth of summer, sections could be effortlessly rolled up to facilitate invigorating airflow. Meanwhile, most European settlers would spend their winters oscillating between freezing solid and hotboxing themselves out of their drafty cabins, forever mystified by some unseen force preventing comfortable living. Spoiler alert, it was poor design. When one pauses to consider the complete synergy of the winter teepee's manifold elements, its graceful aerodynamic cone, the robust buffalo hide insulation, the meticulous inner lining, the precision of its smoke flap ventilation, the profoundly warm floor system, the comforting central hearth, its strategically oriented entrance, and its absolute portability, the overarching picture crystallizes with undeniable clarity. This was far more than a rudimentary shelter. It stood as an enduring masterpiece of human adaptation, a design quietly honed and perfected through countless generations of acute observation, rigorous testing, and continuous refinement. It represented a unique form of architectural wisdom, sculpted and refined by the very environment it was designed to conquer. Indeed, the majority of architectural structures across the globe tend to evolve somewhat accidentally. A builder constructs a dwelling, discovers a leaky roof, applies a makeshift fix, and this reactive cycle continues until the building no longer poses an imminent threat of collapse. The teepee, however, did not merely stumble into its profound greatness. Every single component was meticulously deliberate. Nothing was superfluous. Nothing was over-engineered. Nothing demanded a miraculous intervention to perform flawlessly at -30 degrees Celsius. It represented the antithesis of trial and error architecture. It was unmistakably trial and excellence. Its profound genius resided in the seamless integration of all its disparate elements. The iconic conical shape directly supported optimal airflow. The inner lining enhanced heating efficiency. The robust hides provided exceptional insulation. The sturdy poles facilitated unparalleled portability, and the directional entrance expertly managed wind patterns. They thoroughly inspected carts for hidden weapons, demanded explicit written permission for entry, and kept a vigilant eye on anyone who appeared nervous or evasive. Smugglers, spies, disgruntled peasants, opportunistic thieves. Anyone could pose a potential threat. And in my opinion, this level of constant social filtering would undoubtedly drive most modern individuals to distraction. But for medieval guards, it was simply an inherent part of the job. Tension invariably escalated when nobles paid a visit. Their large entourages created chaotic traffic jams. Horses reared anxiously, servants panicked, and everyone, including the guards, was expected to display flawless discipline. One slip-up, a casual insult, or even an accidental delay could lead to severe punishment. The gatehouse was also the initial point of contact for all incoming news. Rumors of war, the approach of diplomatic envoys, outbreaks of plague, or sudden political dramas. Guards often learned bad news hours before the Lord himself did. In that crucial sense, they were more than mere sentinels. They were the castle's indispensable early warning system. For a guard, the gatehouse was a relentless test of instinct, unwavering discipline, and sheer courage. It served as the castle's handshake with the outside world, and at times, its impenetrable shield against it. Patrolling the castle walls constituted one of the most repetitive, yet undeniably essential, duties in a guard's demanding life. Hour after hour, guards methodically walked the battlements, the stone pathways atop the walls, maintaining an unblinking watch for threats both immediate and distant. It might sound straightforward, but wall patrols demanded acute vision, unshakable nerves, and an almost unnatural tolerance for profound boredom. Personally, I genuinely believe this job was specifically designed to mentally break anyone who wasn't exceptionally tough. If the Roman street market was a vast, living organism, then its thieves were the persistent parasites clinging stubbornly to its skin, always present, remarkably clever, and seemingly impossible to dislodge. Petty crime wasn't some unwelcome byproduct of market life. It was a fundamental component, meticulously woven into its very fabric. With thousands of bodies pressed together and coin purses provocatively swaying from belts, the scene was an absolute haven for pickpockets. Frankly, I believe Roman thieves deserved an honorary degree in criminal innovation, as some of their methods were truly, disturbingly impressive. The most ubiquitous culprits were children, swift, diminutive, and frequently underestimated. They navigated the dense crowds with the effortless grace of fish gliding through water. A slight brush of the elbow, a subtle tug on a sleeve, a perfectly executed fake stumble, and just like that, Your purse was already halfway across the street. Older thieves, on the other hand, operated with chilling coordination in teams. One would skillfully ensnare your attention with engaging conversation. Another would subtly obstruct your line of sight, while a third deftly relieved you of your valuables. It was a symphony of organized chaos, and I'd wager that modern scammers would gaze upon their efficiency with profound admiration. Market guards, of course, were a recognizable presence. They ambled through the throng, truncheons in hand, casting suspicious glances at anyone who appeared either too watchful or suspiciously at ease. However, these guards were fundamentally limited. Rome's sprawling immensity meant that crime could always move with a speed and agility that authority simply couldn't match. Some unfortunate victims would cry out for help, a desperate shout of "thief!" But by the time the sluggish crowd began to react, the culprit had long since vanished, melting into the intricate labyrinth of alleys and stairwells. And here's a personal opinion no one solicited, but I'll offer it nonetheless. The buffalo hide covering stands as perhaps the most elegant example of utilizing the land without abusing it. The hides were revered as a gift, not a resource to be endlessly exploited, but something to be deeply respected, wisely utilized, and profoundly honored. The final outcome was a teepee wrapped with such intelligent precision and tightness that even the most roaring winter winds were compelled to pause, consider, and concede. Well, all right, fair enough. If you've ever had the opportunity to observe a buffalo up close, two immediate realities strike you. First, its sheer, immense scale, and second, that it appears prepped for winter as if bracing for a direct confrontation with the Ice Age itself. Buffalo hides weren't merely warm. They were absurdly, unfairly, almost ridiculously warm in a way that makes you question why modern winter jackets command such exorbitant prices yet deliver so little in performance. I've personally worn jackets marketed as windproof, thermal, or Arctic grade, and yet, a buffalo in January somehow still appears infinitely more comfortable than I do just walking to the mailbox. And this, precisely, is why buffalo hides constituted the teepee's formidable winter armor. A buffalo spends its entire life outdoors, casually existing in temperatures that would send most humans into a frantic spiral. Minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit? That's just Tuesday for a buffalo. Its fur is incredibly dense, its hide remarkably thick, and its insulation properties are so exceptional that falling snow often doesn't even melt upon contact, indicating its body retains heat with astonishing efficiency. That's not merely biology. That's an undisputed flex. So, imagine meticulously stitching multiple such hides together to form one colossal, weatherproof cover. It was akin to swaddling your entire home in the North American equivalent of a luxury polar survival suit. Rather than attempting to impose human will upon the environment, a strategy that invariably resulted in rickety, unstable buildings and deeply disillusioned settlers, the teepee harmoniously cooperated with nature. It gracefully accepted the challenges and resources offered by the plains, effectively declaring, "Yes, that works for us." This stood in stark opposition to the prevailing European architectural approach of the era, which could be succinctly summarized as, construct a box, hope the box endures. If the box inevitably collapses, construct another identical box nearby and dutifully repeat the error. The teepee's enduring success and prevalence also stemmed from the fact that it was never merely a freestanding structure. It was, rather, profoundly integrated into an entire way of life. It actively facilitated and supported essential mobility, strengthened communal bonds, enabled vital seasonal movements, aligned with intricate hunting cycles, adapted to climatic variations, and even accommodated profound spiritual practices. A teepee was never simply a rudimentary place to sleep. It was the foundational enabler for families, and indeed entire nations, to harmoniously follow the intricate rhythms of the land. When winter inevitably tightened its formidable grip, the teepee did not simply resist the cold. It masterfully outsmarted it. Even contemporary architects, deeply engaged in the study of sustainable design, frequently find themselves quietly, almost privately, impressed by its principles. While few might publicly confess that their most admired, climate-responsive structure is centuries old and ingeniously crafted without metal screws or reinforced concrete, the truth remains undeniable. The the teepee continues to stand as one of the most remarkably efficient portable dwellings ever conceived and engineered. Ultimately, the winter teepee achieved far more than merely ensuring survival at a brutal -30 degrees Celsius. Too quiet, and one risked losing crucial focus. Too eventful, and one likely faced a grim end. The patrol route typically commenced at a corner tower and meticulously wound its way around the entire perimeter. Along the route, guards meticulously checked arrow slits, leaned over crenellations to survey the expansive countryside, and carefully scanned roads, dense forests, and open fields for any suspicious movement. A lone figure approaching the castle could be harmless, or it could be a scout for a significantly larger invading force. Every distant shape on the horizon had to be meticulously analyzed. Every subtle sound held potential significance. A barking dog, a wisp of distant smoke, a flicker of torchlight. Each minute detail could signal impending danger. Patrols were conducted in every conceivable type of weather: scorching sun, bone-chilling fog, sleet, torrential rain, heavy snow, and winds so fierce they threatened to physically dislodge a man from the wall. And medieval walls offered absolutely no comfort. The stone was perpetually cold, the footing often uneven, and the sheer height terrifying for anyone with even a hint of vertigo. I honestly admire the guards who managed to function effectively up there without constantly visualizing their own dramatic descent into the moat below. But the physical challenge was only half the arduous struggle. The mental strain was profoundly real. Hour-long patrols, repeated day after day, created a monotonous rhythm that could easily lull the senses. Guards had to actively combat the creeping numbness of routine. Missing a crucial detail was simply not an option. Many castles ingeniously introduced specific checkpoints or routine call-outs to compel guards to maintain constant alertness. A sergeant might suddenly appear unexpectedly to test a guard's awareness, asking what they had observed, who was on the road, or whether smoke had risen from a nearby village. Vendors themselves were hardly paragons of honesty either. Many resorted to cheating customers with cleverly rigged scales, subtly hollowed-out weights, or grain deliberately dampened to inflate its cost per pound. A shrewd fishmonger might discreetly sprinkle water on older catches to restore a deceptive sheen. A fruit seller might cunningly bury a layer of rotten figs beneath a tempting display of fresh ones. Personally, I find this particular aspect darkly amusing. Everyone, it seemed, was scrambling to survive, even if it meant artfully bending a few ethical boundaries. But thieves didn't just pilfer goods. They ruthlessly stole opportunities. A hungry family might lose their dinner money in an instant. A hard-working laborer could see an entire week's wages disappear before he even reached home. Crime wasn't merely an annoyance. It was genuinely devastating. And yet, there was a peculiar, almost ingrained acceptance of it. Romans understood that a densely populated city inevitably bred relentless competition, not only for basic necessities like food and work, but also for elusive luck, fleeting comfort, and even fundamental security. Some residents did attempt to fight back. Merchants invested in private guards. Shoppers meticulously hid their coins within their tunics or tucked them into their sandals. Parents constantly warned their children to stay close, but the market was simply too vast, too pulsating with life, and too utterly unpredictable to ever be truly secure. And perhaps that very unpredictability was what made it so utterly irresistible. In the Roman street market, every single step was a calculated gamble. You could depart with a brimming basket of food, or find yourself missing half the money you arrived with. Danger and sheer necessity performed an intricate, unceasing dance together on every crowded street. If you ever find yourself dreaming of stepping back into ancient Rome, allow me to offer a gentle dose of reality. But unlike contemporary clothing companies, the Buffalo never attempted to upsell you with buzzwords like ultralight, breathable, or revolutionary fabric technology. The hides simply communicated, "I will keep you alive. You're welcome." Another aspect I deeply appreciate is the absolute lack of waste in the use of hides. Nothing from a buffalo was discarded. Meat, bones, sinew, fat, hooves, every single part served a profound purpose. The hides themselves underwent an elaborate process of treatment, softening, tanning, and preparation, leveraging knowledge accumulated over hundreds of generations. People today often struggle to competently assemble a bookshelf from a Scandinavian furniture store. Meanwhile, these communities were transforming massive animal hides into airtight, perfectly winter-ready home insulation. The inherent thickness of the hides rendered them exceptionally adept at blocking wind. And if you've never personally experienced standing on the Great Plains during a ferocious winter storm, allow me to paint a vivid picture. The wind doesn't merely blow, it attacks. It behaves with the raw intensity of unresolved emotional issues, seeking out every minuscule gap, every hairline crack, every perceivable weakness. Buffalo Hide handled such relentless wind with the composure and authority of a seasoned bouncer at a raucous tavern. Asterisk no entry. Move along. Asterisk the most remarkable aspect. A Buffalo Hide teepee didn't just proficiently retain warmth, it also masterfully repelled moisture. Snow slid off effortlessly instead of clinging, and rain beat it up and rolled away without penetration. This wasn't some primitive technology. This was, in fact, highly refined environmental engineering. It empowered its inhabitants to live well, to thrive in warmth, to cultivate resilience, and to exist in profound harmony with a landscape formidable enough to mercilessly expose any architectural flaw. This, truly, is the enduring beauty of the teepee. A humble, unassuming shape, a deceptively simple frame, and an intrinsic brilliance whose profound wisdom continues to resonate and inspire even today. In the unforgiving expanse of the far north, winter never made a gentle entrance. Instead, it descended with the inexorable might of a slow-moving beast, systematically snatching minutes of precious daylight until the sun merely skimmed the icy horizon. For the resilient Viking communities scattered across the rugged landscapes of Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, these darkest weeks of the year were profoundly more than a mere inconvenience. They represented an ultimate test of raw endurance. Crops had long been harvested, the tumultuous seas became treacherous, and the world beyond the protective walls of the Longhouse seemed utterly frozen in time. This bleak, challenging backdrop set the stage for Joel, the Yule season, a festival meticulously crafted not merely for celebration, but as a vital act of spiritual survival. As the longest night of the year drew near, people observed the celestial shift with a complex blend of profound dread and resolute determination. To their perception, the sun was not simply concealing itself. It was palpably weakening, each progressively shortened day hinting at a looming cosmic struggle between the enduring light and the shadowy forces bent on engulfing it. And while the Vikings were renowned for their pragmatic approach to life, they were equally, if not more so, deeply spiritual, holding unwavering belief in unseen powers that orchestrated the world's intricate rhythms. Joel provided them a tangible means to influence, or at the very least psychologically cope with, that rhythm. Fail such a test, and you might find yourself assigned to muck cleaning duty, or, even worse, relegated to the dreaded night shift. Despite the crushing monotony, these patrols endowed guards with a unique and invaluable understanding of the world beyond the castle. They possessed an intimate knowledge of the land, the regular traffic patterns, and the subtle shifts in weather. They were invariably the first to sense when something felt genuinely amiss. And in medieval times, instinct constituted half the job. A guard on patrol had to seamlessly blend rigorous discipline with sharp intuition, tirelessly scanning a landscape where danger could silently gather just beyond the tree line. In the end, wall patrols were truly the castle's heartbeat, constant, vigilant, and utterly indispensable. If daytime patrols were characterized by their tedious nature, night watches were downright brutal. Once the sun dipped below the distant hills and the castle surrendered entirely to the suffocating cloak of darkness, everything irrevocably changed. The air grew perceptibly colder, sounds traveled farther with unnerving clarity, and every deepening shadow seemed to harbor a lurking threat. In my opinion, this was unequivocally the most psychologically demanding aspect of a guard's life. Humans are simply not biologically designed for sustained vigilance in absolute darkness. Yet, medieval guards were expected to perform flawlessly without error. Night watches were carefully divided into shifts, typically lasting between 2 and 4 hours. The objective was straightforward: prevent utter exhaustion, but never, under any circumstances, allow the castle to go unobserved. Guards strategically positioned themselves on the walls, within the towers, and at the crucial gatehouse, each either holding a lantern or standing near a brazier for meager warmth. Light itself was a complex duality, both a blessing and a curse. The city absolutely did not smell of pristine marble temples and freshly laundered linen. It reeked of humanity, a thick, pungent, and utterly overwhelming scent of humanity. And nowhere was this truth more undeniably obvious than within its bustling street markets. Personally, I believe modern people romanticize Rome far too much. Drop them into a genuine Roman market for just 5 minutes, and I guarantee half would swoon from the sensory overload, while the other half would sprint straight back to their time machine. Let's begin with the streets themselves. Rome was home to hundreds of thousands of residents, yet it lacked garbage trucks, proper sewer grates, or any semblance of a city-wide cleaning schedule. Waste consequently piled up in countless corners. Food scraps lay rotting on the ancient stones, while stray animals roamed freely, generously contributing their own gifts to the landscape. Now, combine this with spilled wine, discarded fish guts, the ever-present stench of urine. Yes, public urination was considered completely normal, and the acrid smoke wafting from 1,000 charcoal braziers, and the air transformed into a swirling, dizzying cloud of odors, simultaneously delicious and utterly horrifying. The noise assaulting your ears was no gentler. People shouted incessantly, not out of anger, but simply because it was the only way to be heard above the din. Vendors hollered their prices. Children shrieked with joyful abandon during games of tag. Wooden carts rattled violently over cobblestones. Dogs barked their greetings and warnings, and the occasional rooster crowed loudly for absolutely no discernible reason. Since ancient Rome had absolutely no noise regulations whatsoever, the market became a relentless sonic explosion from the first rays of dawn until dusk's embrace. Honestly, I suspect Romans developed superior lung capacity and significantly thicker patience simply by enduring daily life in such an environment. My personal conviction is that if buffalo hide insulation were commercially available today, it would fetch an astronomical price, be marketed as artisanal, eco-friendly thermal shielding, and instantly sell out to affluent individuals who profess a love for nature but recoil in panic at the sight of an actual insect. The Tipi didn't just utilize buffalo hides. It brilliantly maximized their inherent genius. If the buffalo hide exterior served as the Tipi's formidable winter coat, then its inner lining represented a hidden stratum of engineering brilliance that most observers never even noticed. At first glance, it appeared deceptively simple, merely another layer of hide or cloth suspended along the interior walls. Yet, in reality, this seemingly humble lining transformed the Tipi from a very good shelter into something far more astonishing. It made you wonder, how is this actually warmer than a colonial cabin built by a dozen men with axes and sheer hope? The lining was meticulously designed to create a sophisticated double-wall insulation system. This was not the result of mere guesswork. It was a deliberate, intentional design, honed and refined over generations. The outer layer of hide robustly fended off wind, snow, and whatever inclement weather was currently threatening to ruin someone's week. The inner lining, suspended several inches inside, formed a crucial air pocket between the two layers. This clever air pocket functioned with the exact same principle as the insulation found in modern homes, but crucially, it did so without the need for fiberglass, synthetic foam, or the existential dread associated with home repair bills. When the central fire burned, warm air naturally ascended and was expertly guided upward between the lining and the outer cover, circulating in a perfectly controlled cycle. Through a series of potent rituals, the warmth of roaring fires, lavish feasting, solemn sacrifice, and compelling storytelling, they collectively endeavored to beckon the sun back from the encroaching edges of the void. Extensive preparations for Joel commenced many weeks prior to the actual festival. Families diligently dried and preserved meat, meticulously brewed mead, and carefully moved their precious livestock into insulated, warm enclosures. A crucial part of this process involved discerningly selecting the most robust animals for future breeding, while designating the weaker ones for the season's inevitable, though necessary, slaughter. Among all creatures, however, one animal held particularly profound significance: the boar. Powerful, inherently stubborn, and revered as sacred to the god Freyr, the boar personified fertility, indomitable strength, and the promise of renewal, qualities that the community desperately yearned for during winter's most profound chill. To ritually sacrifice a boar at Joel was to engage in a deeply symbolic act. It was to feed the very cycle of nature itself, a profound offering intended to gently coax the returning sun toward its triumphant rebirth. Within the sanctuary of the Longhouse, an air of profound anticipation steadily intensified. Freshly cut pine branches adorned the sturdy wooden pillars, their invigorating, resinous scent gracefully commingling with the comforting aroma of wood smoke. Children, gathered close, were captivated by tales of ancient, unforgiving winters, the valiant deeds of heroic ancestors, and the epic struggles of gods who ceaselessly battled formidable frost giants to preserve the fragile balance of their world. The crackling hearth, radiating a tangible warmth, became more than just a source of heat. It transformed into the very epicenter of existence, a beacon of profound reassurance. As long as its vibrant flames danced and consumed, so too did hope persist. This, indeed, was the very heart of Joel. It aided guards in seeing, but it also rendered them dangerously visible targets. Many shrewdly chose to stand half-hidden, allowing their eyes to gradually adjust to the deep dark instead of relying on a flickering flame that betrayed their position. Sounds became the insidious enemy. A loose stone dislodging from a wall, the wind rustling eerily through trees, a fox stealthily sneaking across the outer yard. Any noise, no matter how innocuous, could be misinterpreted as an imminent threat. And honestly, I can't blame them one bit. In an era of ceaseless warfare and sudden, brutal raids, paranoia was not a weakness but a highly refined survival skill. A guard who casually dismissed something strange might very well doom the entire castle. To remain awake and alert, guards employed various tricks. Biting their tongues, pacing in relentless circles, whispering fervent prayers, or rhythmically tapping their weapons against the stone. Falling asleep while on duty was considered one of the most egregious offenses imaginable. In some places, the punishment was public humiliation. In others, it was swift execution. And while that sounds incredibly harsh, a single sleeping guard could, quite literally, invite catastrophe. Night also provided a perfect cloak for the clandestine approach of spies or saboteurs. Intruders frequently moved under the cover of moonlight, hoping to slip through unguarded postern gates or shadowy corners of the wall. Guards had to be acutely aware not only of what lurked outside the castle but also of what stirred within its very confines. Sometimes, the greater danger emanated from betrayal, servants bribed to open critical doors, conspirators whispering treason in dimly lit stairwells. I personally think this internal threat was even more terrifying. You could prepare extensively for enemies outside. You simply couldn't prepare for a trusted friend suddenly turning traitor. And then there was the inescapable filth underfoot. A thick, viscous sludge formed wherever water runoff merged with organic waste. Sandals would slip precariously, tunics quickly became soiled, and one had to constantly watch their step with extreme caution. Even then, you were almost guaranteed to eventually step in something undeniably questionable. Public slaves were occasionally dispatched to sweep, but only when someone complained loudly enough to warrant their attention. Otherwise, Rome relied heavily on the sun, the slow passage of time, and sheer, unadulterated optimism to deal with its perpetual mess. Yet, and this is the truly remarkable part, people adored these markets regardless. The distinctive smells and the incessant noise were not irritants, but rather an integral part of the vibrant rhythm of Roman life. They signaled that the city was alive and thriving, not decaying. They indicated that trade was flourishing, fires were burning, pots were simmering, and animals were actively contributing to the bustling scene. For Romans, this pervasive discomfort was simply understood as the inherent price of civilization. From a modern viewpoint, such an environment sounds utterly chaotic, perhaps even unbearable. But from a Roman perspective, this relentless sensory bombardment was the very pulse of their sprawling empire, filthy, boisterous, overcrowded, and absolutely bursting with opportunity. In its own wonderfully messy way, the market's pervasive filth served as a constant, tangible reminder of Rome's greatest paradox. The world's most powerful and sophisticated empire was built upon streets that reeked of yesterday's fish stew and the ever-present scent of donkey dung. For all its inherent chaos, pervasive filth, and deafening noise, the Roman street market was far more than just a place to acquire figs or haggle over olives. It served as the empire's undeniable, albeit unofficial, social network. Instead of merely dissipating into the cold night or becoming trapped inefficiently at the Tipi's apex, that warmed air was skillfully channeled downward along the interior, maintaining a remarkably consistent and comfortable temperature throughout the living space. The exquisite result was a convection system so exceptionally efficient that even the harshest winter temperatures outside could not penetrate the cozy interior. The inner lining also played a pivotal role in masterful smoke management. Smoke from the central fire didn't just drift sideways across the floor, compelling everyone to cough as if auditioning for a 19th century consumption drama. Instead, the lining expertly funneled the smoke upward, directing it precisely toward the smoke hole at the peak, where the adjustable flaps allowed it to escape cleanly. This ingenious system achieved a perfect balance of airflow. Fresh air entered seamlessly from the bottom edge of the teepee, warmed by the fire and the inner air pocket, and then naturally rose upward, efficiently pushing out smoke while meticulously retaining precious heat. From a pragmatic standpoint, the lining also served to effectively prevent cold drafts from racing along the ground, a persistent and uncomfortable problem that plagued many European-style dwellings. Cold air simply could not sweep unabated across the floor because the lining gently redirected it upward, integrating it into the warm air currents. Floors covered with thick hides and soft mats benefited even further from this controlled air movement, collectively creating a surprisingly snug and inviting environment. The sheer brilliance of the lining truly manifested in its remarkable adaptability. In the depths of winter, it could be fully lowered to optimally trap heat. In the warmer months of summer, sections could be effortlessly raised to permit generous airflow. In a world where the oppressive darkness felt almost eternal, the Vikings defiantly gathered, feasted with gusto, and reverently honored the turning of the year. They held an unwavering belief that even the most diminutive flame, whether flickering brightly in a hearth or burning resolutely within a human heart, possessed the inherent power to defy the longest night and herald the slow, triumphant return of the life-giving sun. At the very core of Joel, transcending all other practices, stood one ritual held in unparalleled sacredness: the solemn sacrifice of the boar, meticulously dedicated to Freyr, the Vanir god deeply associated with fertility, peace, and bountiful prosperity. For the Vikings, Freyr was not merely a distant deity. He was the unequivocal guarantor of the forthcoming year's harvest, the unseen yet potent force orchestrating warm, fruitful summers, lush, fertile fields, and the cyclical renewal of all living beings. During the unyielding, cold grip of winter, as precious food stores precariously dwindled and daylight grew painfully scarce, the act of honoring Freyr transcended simple reverence, becoming instead a critical matter of both profound spiritual devotion and practical survival. The designated boar, frequently the finest, most robust animal a household could possibly rear, was accorded immense respect. In certain territories, it was ritualistically groomed and even adorned with intricate wreaths or vibrant ribbons, a powerful symbolic gesture recognizing its pivotal role in the very sustenance of the community. This was emphatically not a mindless act of brutal slaughter. Rather, it was a profoundly solemn exchange, the deliberate giving of life in hopeful anticipation that life itself would, in turn, persist and flourish. Prior to the ultimate sacrifice, the magnificent boar was respectfully led before the gathered clan. Despite the pervasive fear, guards adapted. Their senses sharpened, their instincts became exquisitely refined. Over time, night itself transformed into a familiar, albeit challenging, companion, a vast, silent battlefield they learned to expertly navigate. And when dawn finally broke, painting the castle walls in hues of gold, every guard on duty felt a quiet, profound triumph. Another night survived, another morning hard-earned. In a world utterly devoid of electric lights, radios, or sophisticated surveillance cameras, Medieval castles depended heavily on intricate systems of identification, secret passwords, coded signals, and meticulously choreographed routines that unequivocally told guards who belonged and who absolutely did not. And honestly, I think this represents one of the cleverest and most consistently underrated aspects of castle security. People often imagine medieval warfare as solely brute strength and direct confrontation, but the truth is, it was also profoundly about cunning, meticulous planning, and strategic intelligence. Intelligence and subtlety were equally paramount in safeguarding medieval castles. The nightly password, often referred to as the watchword, was an indispensable tool. Each guard on duty received it at dusk, a hushed transmission from sergeant to soldier, always delivered beyond the hearing of any potential eavesdropper. Anyone approaching the fortress after dark, be it a royal messenger, a returning patrol, or even the castle lord himself, was obliged to provide this secret phrase. Failure to do so would instantly escalate the situation. Spears would lower, arrows would be notched, and any attempted negotiation would swiftly devolve into a highly uncomfortable and dangerous standoff. I personally appreciate the inherent democracy of this system. Even a high-ranking noble could find their entry challenged by a humble guard if protocol mandated it. Yet, passwords were not the sole layer of protection. If a plebeian wished to discover who had been elected, who had been exiled, who had divorced, who had passed away, or who had committed a social gaffe at last night's dinner party, they didn't consult a newspaper. They simply went to the market. And candidly, I believe this dynamic market functioned with greater efficiency than half the political institutions Rome ever bothered to create. Every morning, gossip flowed with greater speed and abundance than wine at a lavish banquet. Women congregated around fruit stalls, eagerly exchanging hushed rumors about their neighbors. Men awaiting their morning bread updated each other on the latest Senate debates, typically exaggerating the details beyond all recognition. Retired soldiers, with booming voices, regaled listeners with tales of battles they had never actually fought. Slave dealers and various tradesmen overheard absolutely everything, then promptly repeated it, often twice as loudly. Rome didn't just disseminate news, it actively performed it. Politics inevitably seeped into every conversation, whether you desired it or not. Supporters of rival candidates would fiercely argue over grain prices, new taxation schemes, ongoing military campaigns, and, of course, which politician was secretly entangled with whose wife. These debates could become incredibly heated, sometimes even dangerously so. Fistfights erupting in the very heart of the market were often treated as spontaneous, public entertainment. Personally, I'm convinced Romans accidentally invented political commentary. Half their arguments sound uncannily similar to modern online comment sections. But the market wasn't solely a stage for drama and debate. It was also the vital crucible where countless relationships were forged. Fishermen regularly sold their catches to the same familiar tavern keepers. Olive farmers easily recognized their loyal, returning customers. Freedmen tirelessly sought out job opportunities. Every aspect of its design was adjustable, responsive, and intelligently conceived to work with natural forces, rather than in futile opposition to them. There were no superfluous materials, no wasted space, and no desperate battles with the elements. Only smart, efficient engineering woven deeply into the very fabric of daily life. At the very pinnacle of every tipi resided one of its most frequently overlooked, yet profoundly brilliant features, the smoke flaps. To an untrained eye, they might simply appear decorative, two triangular pieces of hide fluttering gently in the breeze. But to anyone who has ever endured the experience of a winter fire in an enclosed space, these flaps are nothing short of heroic. They are, in essence, the tipi's sophisticated climate control system. Centuries before humanity conceived of thermostats, intricate chimneys, or the modern obsession with smart home technology, these simple smoke flaps provided masterful control over the tipi's ventilation. When the central fire burned, typically a small, steady, and carefully managed blaze, it naturally produced smoke that ascended toward the top of the structure. Without an intelligent mechanism to guide this smoke outward, the interior would swiftly transform into a wood-fired sauna gone horribly wrong. However, the ingeniously designed flaps expertly directed the smoke upward and outward, effectively functioning as an adjustable chimney. By manipulating two long, slender poles, the flaps could be opened wide, cinched closed, or angled in precise directions, depending on the prevailing wind conditions. If the wind unexpectedly shifted, a common occurrence on the expansive plains, often with the abruptness of someone slamming a door, the flaps could be swiftly repositioned to ensure the smoke continued its efficient escape. This dynamic adjustment allowed fresh air to enter from the bottom while warm air circulated in a meticulously controlled pattern. Here, in a deeply symbolic gesture, each individual placed a hand upon its bristled back and solemnly swore a Joel oath, vows that could encompass pledges of future bravery, declarations of intentions for the approaching season, or sacred commitments to resolve lingering feuds once the winter snows finally receded. These oaths, uttered in the revered presence of the gods, their revered ancestors, and all assembled kin, were considered absolutely binding. To break them invited not only profound dishonor but, far more ominously, certain divine disfavor. Following the completion of the sacrifice, the precious blood of the boar was meticulously collected and ceremonially sprinkled upon carved wooden idols, ancient ceremonial stones, and even directly onto the participants themselves. This potent act, known as blot, was believed to powerfully reinforce the sacred bond between mortals and the divine realm. Subsequently, the meat was reverently roasted over a roaring open fire, its rich, savory aroma blending harmoniously with the sense of pine and wood smoke, permeating the longhouse with a luxurious fullness that momentarily banished the external harshness. The ensuing feast was a deeply communal affair, every single slice of boar consumed imbued with profound symbolic weight. To partake in its consumption was to share directly in Frere's blessing, to participate in the collective hope that the fields would once again yield bountiful harvests, and that the sun would irrevocably regain its life-giving strength. Children, in particular, were lovingly told that the spirit of the mighty boar would ascend to run across the celestial skies, serving as a powerful guide for the returning light back toward the world of humans. Guards also employed a repertoire of visual signals: a raised torch, a waved lantern, or a specific sequence of horn blasts. These methods facilitated rapid communication across the extensive walls and through the bustling courtyard. A solitary horn might announce the return of a patrol, while two horns could signify the approach of unknown visitors. Three horns, however, were an unambiguous signal for imminent danger or grave trouble. The sheer ingenuity and efficiency of this system consistently impressed me. In an era devoid of modern technology, they engineered remarkably reliable communication networks. Beyond immediate alerts, castles incorporated routines designed to ferret out imposters. Some fortresses mandated that guards traverse particular routes at precise intervals. If a patrol failed to appear as scheduled, it immediately raised a red flag, indicating a breach or an issue. Others utilized distinct call-and-response phrases, shouted between towers across the battlements. One guard would issue a predetermined line, and the adjacent tower would reply with its matching counterphrase. This clever system was designed to thwart attackers from surreptitiously replacing or eliminating a watchman without immediate detection. Inside the castle walls, servants and residents also required methods to verify their belonging. Many were issued tokens or badges, while others adhered to stringent curfew regulations. After nightfall, even familiar faces faced detention until their identities and intentions could be thoroughly confirmed. To my mind, this pervasive level of cautiousness vividly illustrates the precariousness of true medieval life. A single moment of misplaced trust, a lapse in vigilance, had the potential to compromise an entire fortress. These password systems, therefore, were far more than mere bureaucratic rituals. They were critical, life-saving instruments. Mothers meticulously arranged marriages or strategically formed new family alliances. The market fundamentally stitched the community together in a way that grand temples and imposing government buildings simply could never achieve. Performers, too, flocked to this bustling nexus. Jugglers, melodic flute players, compelling storytellers, daring snake handlers, and even earnest amateur philosophers all utilized the captive crowds to earn a few meager coins or, at the very least, a valuable bit of attention. Children would trail after them, a mixture of wide-eyed amazement and genuine terror in their expressions. If someone delivered a particularly witty joke or played an especially clever tune, word would spread with astonishing rapidity. Fame in ancient Rome didn't emerge from social media. It was earned by being loud, creatively captivating, and strategically positioned in the right part of the market at precisely the right moment. And then, a particularly intriguing presence: the fortune tellers. They would meticulously read omens gleaned from the flight of birds or toss pebbles into intricate patterns, confidently predicting fortunes for anyone willing to part with a few coins. Personally, I consider them masters of improvisation. No matter the question posed, they always had a mystical-sounding answer readily at hand. In the final analysis, the market wasn't merely a place where Romans acquired their food. It was the very epicenter of their social lives. It served as a grand theater of human behavior, a dynamic political battleground, an ever-churning rumor factory, and an indispensable community center brilliantly disguised as sheer chaos. For the average Roman citizen, it wasn't an optional destination. It was absolutely essential. At the close of each day, the Roman street market transcended mere noise, filth, food, gossip, and thieves. It was, at its core, a relentless battlefield for survival. What renders this design particularly clever is its remarkable responsiveness. The smoke flaps required no complex ropes, intricate gears, cumbersome pulleys, or elaborate mechanical systems. Their operation simply demanded 2 poles and an astute understanding of wind behavior. With just a quick, intuitive adjustment, the entire airflow dynamics of the tipi could be precisely altered. Meanwhile, European settlers were laboring to construct rigid square houses with chimneys that frequently clogged, smoked profusely, or tragically collapsed under snow, primarily because they were conceived without any meaningful consideration for local environmental conditions. Beyond smoke management, the smoke flaps also played a crucial role in meticulous temperature regulation. Opening them wide allowed excess heat to escape, effectively cooling the tipi during warmer seasons. Conversely, narrowing them enabled the tipi to retain warmth far more effectively. In winter, when temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Fahrenheit and the outside world felt like a hostile, Arctic refrigerator, careful and precise flap adjustments ensured the interior remained comfortably warm without ever suffocating its occupants. Their strategic placement at the very peak of the cone was entirely intentional. The naturally rising warm air created a powerful draft that efficiently pulled smoke upward. The flaps, functioning as dynamic directional vents, harnessed this upward flow to purify the air inside while consistently maintaining comfort. No trapped smoke, no wasted heat, and absolutely no need to construct a chimney taller than the house itself. In essence, the smoke flaps elegantly transformed the tipi's simple opening into a dynamic, aesthetically pleasing, low-tech masterpiece of environmental control. Simple, profoundly effective, and utterly reliable. It was a solution so intelligently conceived that even today, architects study it with genuine interest and perhaps a subtle touch of envy. In this comprehensive sense, the boar sacrifice was far more than a mere ritual. It represented a profound covenant, a solemn promise from the Vikings to bravely endure winter's darkness with unwavering resolve, and a heartfelt plea that the gods, in turn, would reward their devotion with abundant prosperity upon the gentle return of spring. If the solemn boar sacrifice represented the sacred, beating heart of Joel, then mead, or MJR, was undeniably its golden, circulating lifeblood. In the vivid Viking imagination, mead transcended the simple definition of a mere beverage. It was revered as a direct gift from the gods, a potent symbol embodying celebration, intellectual creativity, and the unwavering strength of communal unity. Crafted with meticulous care from fermented honey and water, and often subtly enhanced with a selection of aromatic herbs or wild berries, mead captured the very essence of the year's stored sweetness, a golden liquid warmth that felt like captured sunlight. And there was no more fitting or imperative time to release this precious warmth than amidst the harsh, frozen depths of winter. Within the warmly illuminated confines of the longhouse, the amber mead flowed generously and without restraint. Imposing drinking horns, frequently adorned with intricate carvings of mythical serpents and ancient runes, were passed ceremoniously from hand to hand. Each participant drank in turn, their actions guided by a precise ritual and a deeply ingrained etiquette designed to powerfully reinforce communal solidarity. In this setting, no one ever drank in isolation. A raised horn served as a clear and potent invitation, sometimes to offer a reverent toast to the mighty gods, at other times to honor cherished ancestors, and occasionally, simply to express profound gratitude for having endured yet another challenging year. They actively prevented ambushes, effectively deterred infiltrators, and empowered guards to challenge anyone, irrespective of their social standing. In a period rife with disguise and elaborate deception as common military tactics, the simple watchword could be the sole barrier between a peaceful night and a deadly, unforeseen attack. In essence, passwords not only ensured the survival of the inhabitants but also kept castles from becoming elaborate architectural crime scenes. Castle towers were much more than striking architectural features. They functioned as the true nerve centers of surveillance. Anyone assigned to a tower found themselves immersed in a world defined by wind, height, and relentless, solitary observation. And honestly, I believe tower guards bore one of the toughest psychological burdens. Unlike their counterparts in the lively courtyard or the relative warmth of the gatehouse, tower guards were often alone, perpetually cold, and compelled to gaze at the distant horizon for hours on end, constantly scanning for any sign of movement, no matter how small. Each tower provided a unique and often expansive vantage point. From the uppermost levels, a lookout could survey villages, dense forests, winding roads, and occasionally even catch the glint of a river miles away. This unparalleled panoramic view made towers the castle's primary early warning system. A wisp of smoke, a faint dust cloud in the distance, or the flash of metal reflecting sunlight could all signal impending trouble. The pressure associated with this duty was immense. Imagine being the first person tasked with spotting an approaching army before it reached your walls. A missed sign could mean the castle had mere minutes, rather than hours, to prepare its defenses. Life inside a tower was undeniably cramped. Every plebeian who dared to step into that crowded, tumultuous maze confronted a stark, undeniable truth. If you failed to fight fiercely for your place in the market, you simply wouldn't eat. And truthfully, I believe this relentless, daily struggle forged the very essence of Roman identity far more profoundly than any of their magnificent marble monuments ever could. Plebeians navigated existence on razor-thin margins. Most earned their wages by the day, not by the week, meaning every morning dawned with the heavy weight of uncertainty. A poor day at work translated directly into a meager dinner. A day missed entirely meant no dinner whatsoever. The market was the raw, unvarnished arena where this brutal economic reality became painfully, inescapably obvious. You purchased only what you could strictly afford, typically just enough for a single meal. Food was never a given. It was hard-won. People learned to stretch their precious coins with astonishing creativity. Older vegetables sold for less in the late afternoon. Fishmongers drastically lowered their prices before closing, desperate to avoid discarding their perishable goods. Bakers offered yesterday's bread at a welcome discount. Witnessing Romans navigate these fundamental choices feels incredibly familiar, almost like observing the ancient roots of our modern paycheck-to-paycheck existence. Personally, I find a strange, quiet comfort in recognizing how ancient peoples grappled with the same enduring struggles we face today, meticulously making budgets, tirelessly hunting for bargains, and fervently hoping today's meager money will somehow last until tomorrow. The market also laid bare social inequality with painful, undeniable honesty. Wealthy Romans rarely, if ever, set foot here themselves. They dispatched their slaves to perform these tasks. Meanwhile, the poor navigated the dense crowds on their own, bargaining fiercely, almost desperately, for every single coin. At the very heart of every tipi, both literally and metaphorically, burned a small, steady fire. This was not a roaring bonfire, nor a dramatic blaze worthy of a fantasy epic, but rather a carefully controlled hearth that consistently provided warmth, gentle light, and a dedicated space for cooking, all without ever threatening to transform the entire structure into a suffocating smoke chamber or an emergency situation. The central hearth was the quiet, unassuming workhorse of tipi life, accomplishing every task a European fireplace performed, but with significantly fewer structural complaints or operational demands. The precise placement of the fire in the exact center of the teepee was far from accidental. It was a deliberate choice that ensured even heat distribution throughout the dwelling, facilitated efficient smoke movement directly upward, and maintained a safe, comfortable distance from the walls. If you've ever had the dubious experience of lighting a fire too close to something flammable, be it a curtain, a log cabin wall, or even your own dignity, you will profoundly appreciate the critical importance of this intelligent design choice. The teepee's ingenious geometry allowed the fire's heat to ascend directly upward, gather precisely beneath the smoke hole, and then circulate through the sophisticated warm air channels crafted by the inner lining. A modest fire was more than adequate. The teepee never required a massive, raging blaze to maintain comfortable warmth at -30 degrees Fahrenheit, primarily because the structure itself performed the vast majority of the thermal work. A surprisingly small flame could keep the interior wonderfully comfortable, a fact that utterly baffled early European observers, who invariably assumed one needed to construct a fire colossal enough to melt the Arctic. Instead, the teepee relied on supreme efficiency rather than overwhelming force, a lesson that modern heating systems would undoubtedly benefit from relearning. The Vikings held a firm conviction that shared drink possessed a unique power to bind people together, deftly dissolving the psychological and social barriers that the relentless pressures of hardship invariably sought to erect. As the central hearth roared with unrestrained energy, the longhouse vibrated with a palpable life. Shadows performed an animated ballet along the rough-hewn timbered beams, flickering and twisting as if ancestral spirits had indeed joined the vibrant gathering. Mead, in its gentle potency, effortlessly loosened tongues, perceptibly thawed spirits previously hardened by winter's chill, and skillfully transformed the solemnity of the earlier sacrifice into unrestrained celebration. Faces grew flushed with the combined warmth of the fire and the potent drink. Warriors, with playful exaggeration, regaled their audience with tales of epic battles. Seasoned fishermen boasted of storms miraculously weathered, and confident farmers, brimming with bold optimism, predicted the abundance of the coming year's harvest. Laughter, unrestrained and hearty, swelled through the hall as the night deepened, and for a few precious, fleeting hours, the relentless struggles of winter felt mercifully distant. Yet, meat consumption was far more than mere indulgence. It was a carefully ritualized release of pent-up tension, a vital psychological shield against the monotonous, crushing weight of the season. Each hornful offered a renewed surge of courage. Courage to stoically endure the prolonged cold, courage to bravely confront the profound uncertainties of the months ahead, and, critically, courage to nurture an enduring hope for renewal. Even the revered skalds, the masterful storytellers and poets, relied upon mead for their inspiration, believing it unlocked their minds to receive the profound wisdom of Odin himself. Even amidst the expected revelry and occasional excess, the formal drinking feast, was far from entirely chaotic. The thick stone walls relentlessly trapped cold air, staircases spiraled tightly upward, and arrow slits offered just enough space for observation and shooting, but precious little for comfort or warmth. Guards would take turns huddling near small, smoky braziers, attempting to warm their stiff fingers without losing vital mobility. Personally, I suspect frostbite was as significant a threat as any enemy siege weapon. But comfort, as medieval guards well knew, was an unaffordable luxury. Archers stationed in towers carried an even greater weight of responsibility. Their bows constituted the castle's first line of active defense. From their elevated positions, they could unleash volleys of arrows upon attackers long before any melee troops could reach the main gate. However, such archery demanded extraordinary skill. Shooting from height necessitated precise adjustments for wind conditions, trajectory, and distance. A single miscalculation squandered precious ammunition, and during a siege, arrows were often as valuable as food supplies. Communication between towers was absolutely vital. Guards employed a system of horn blasts, shouted signals, or specific lantern flashes to relay their observations. A suspicious figure lurking near the tree line? Signal it. A caravan approaching? Signal it. Something unusual unfolding in the village below? Definitely signal it. Tower guards became adept at interpreting the landscape as if it were a dynamic, living map. Despite the inherent solitude of their post, there was a palpable sense of pride in tower duty. You were, quite literally, above everything, intimately connected to the wind, the changing weather, and the very first intimations of danger. In my estimation, tower guards were unequivocally the castle's eyes, and without their ceaseless vigil, every other defensive measure would inevitably crumble into disarray. A patrician might never experience the unsettling smell of rotten fruit beneath their sandals, but a plebeian knew it intimately. They lived close to the ground, both literally and figuratively. Yet, despite the inherent hardship, the market was undeniably brimming with an indomitable spirit of resilience. You could witness it in the baker who managed a weary laugh through his exhaustion, in the widowed woman who haggled fearlessly for her daily bread, in the fisherman who arrived before dawn, clinging to the hope of a decent catch. You saw it vividly in the children who ran barefoot between the stalls, artfully transforming poverty into a spirited game. Rome often boasted of its grand military victories, but in my opinion, its true, enduring triumph was the sheer endurance of ordinary people who tirelessly carved out a life in a city that rarely, if ever, made things easy. As the day gradually wound down, stalls were packed away, any remaining leftovers were swept into the gutters, and the lingering smell of charcoal slowly faded from the air. The market grew quiet, but only until the first light of dawn. Tomorrow, the familiar cycle would begin anew. The shouting, the bargaining, the cooking, the stealing, the relentless surviving. Rome did not truly run on the pronouncements of emperors or the debates of senators. It ran on these profound, everyday struggles. And in the chaotic, powerful heartbeat of the street market, one can still distinctly hear the reverberating spirit of the empire's millions, stubborn, hungry, and utterly resilient. The hearth's inherent multifunctionality was truly remarkable. It reliably provided essential light during the long nights, supplied the necessary heat for cooking meals, and delivered comforting warmth for sleeping. Pots could be suspended securely above it, food could be expertly roasted beside it, and in times of necessity it even doubled as a primitive yet highly effective drying machine, a crucial utility in a climate where wet clothing was not merely an inconvenience, but a genuine and immediate health hazard. Despite all this utility, the fire remained remarkably contained and manageable. The synergistic design of the smoke hole and flaps efficiently prevented any smoke buildup, and the inner lining further assisted in directing air upward, ensuring that the inhabitants were never subjected to constant coughing fits or forced to squint through a persistent fog of burnt wood. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of the entire hearth system was its seamless cooperation with the teepee's unique conical shape. As warm air rose, it created a natural, self-sustaining current that gently drew fresh air from the bottom edge of the teepee. This ingenious mechanism established a perpetual ventilation cycle that required no cumbersome chimneys, no rigid metal pipes, and absolutely no perilous winter trips onto icy rooftops to unclog anything. It was effortlessly easy to maintain and remarkably quick to adjust. It was, quite simply, a perfect exemplar of achieving both comfort and survival through profoundly thoughtful design, rather than through brute force or over-engineering. The central hearth did not dominate the teepee. It harmonized perfectly with it. Life within a winter teepee wasn't merely warm. It was meticulously organized, intentionally designed, and astonishingly comfortable. A designated and respected host, often the chieftain or a prominent leader, meticulously oversaw the ceremonial passing of the drinking horn, ensuring that all toasts maintained a profound dignity and that the shared drinking unequivocally strengthened communal bonds rather than allowing them to fracture. Under this disciplined guidance, Joel mead feasts evolved into powerful acts of cultural resilience. Within the heart of the longhouse, warmed by the roaring fire and fortified by the golden honey drink, the Vikings actively pushed back against the encroaching darkness of winter, generating a radiant light of their own making. As the mead perceptibly loosened tongues and the firelight cast its softening glow across the longhouse's edges, another absolutely essential element of Joel emerged with profound significance: storytelling. For the Vikings, words were never mere entertainment. They were regarded as living, potent entities capable of profoundly shaping memory, forging identity, and even influencing destiny itself. And, quite honestly, this stands as one of the most compelling and powerful aspects of Viking culture. They possessed no reliance on written books or formal libraries. Instead, their rich history and intricate lore endured precisely because individuals cared deeply enough to meticulously speak it aloud, year after year, across generations. The Skalds, those elite poets, revered keepers of sagas, and authoritative interpreters of law, commanded the room with a presence that rivaled any battle-hardened warrior. They carried entire sagas within the vast repositories of their minds, much as others carried their finely honed blades. With meticulous care, extraordinary skill, and an acute sense of solemn responsibility. To be in the tower meant embracing vigilance, demanding precision, and maintaining a constant awareness that the smallest detail held the potential to alter everything. If the tower served as the castle's vigilant eyes, then its murder holes were undeniably its vicious teeth. Small, often unassuming, yet absolutely lethal. These ingenious architectural features were strategically integrated into gatehouses, vital passageways, and critical choke points, enabling defenders to unleash devastating chaos upon invaders trapped below. And honestly, I think murder holes stand as one of the most compelling reminders that medieval architects were far more than mere builders. They were astute military strategists possessed of surprisingly creative, almost morbid imaginations. A typical murder hole was a modest square or circular opening set into the ceiling, usually positioned directly above an entry passage. If attackers managed to breach an outer gate or batter down a heavy door, they would often surge inside, perhaps cheering, convinced they had conquered the initial stage of the siege. Instead, they would find themselves funneled into a constricted, narrow corridor, jammed together in a vulnerable mass, and suddenly deluged by a torrent of hot sand, heavy stones, scalding water, or even caustic quicklime. Personally, I find the deployment of hot sand to be the most underrated tactic. It insidious infiltrated armor gaps, clung tenaciously to sweaty skin, and inflicted agonizing burns that persisted for weeks. These deadly openings were no accidental happenstance. Castle designers deliberately engineered killing zones, spaces meticulously crafted to ensnare attackers like insects caught in a bottle. The gatehouse, with its multiple layers of defense, was typically the most formidable of these traps. If you've ever resided in a modern apartment seemingly conceived by someone who harbored a profound disdain for human beings, you would deeply appreciate how intelligently and efficiently the Tipi's interior utilized every available inch of space. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing was simply shoved into a corner out of necessity. Instead, every element served a distinct purpose, and that purpose invariably contributed to warmth, fostered togetherness, or directly supported survival, preferably all three. The interior layout adhered to a deeply practical logic, refined and perfected over countless generations. Sleeping areas were strategically positioned around the edges, where layers of hides and furs effectively insulated the ground from the bitter external cold. This circular arrangement of bedding not only provided superior warmth, but also created a natural, implicit boundary, affording each individual a sense of personal space despite the open floor plan. And honestly, it was demonstrably more space-efficient than most modern studio apartments. Plus, crucially, no one was ever embroiled in a heated argument with a landlord over inadequate heating. At the very core, in the absolute center, sat the hearth, the Tipi's sun, the gravitational well around which the entirety of daily life gracefully orbited. People naturally gathered there to cook meals, engage in spirited conversation, craft essential tools, meticulously repair clothing, weave captivating stories, and occasionally ponder why the wind outside sounded remarkably like it was attempting to file a formal complaint. The inherent circular arrangement actively encouraged direct eye contact and fluid conversation, an elusive quality that designers of contemporary open-concept homes continually strive, and frequently fail, to recreate. What truly elevated the Tipi to an exceptionally effective communal space was the pervasive sense of equality that its interior fostered. During Joel, when the external darkness pressed in too closely and the world felt unsettlingly uncertain, it was these profound skalds who served as crucial reminders to everyone that their ancestors had confronted identical fears and had, ultimately, persevered. In a very real sense, they furnished a vital form of psychological armor, translating suffering into narratives of strength and continuity, into something truly profound. These narratives spanned the spectrum from grand epics to intimate personal tales. One moment, the great hall would reverberate with the thunderous clash of Thor against giants. The next, a hush would fall as stories of lost kin or arduous voyages stirred deep emotions. Children, wide-eyed and captivated, absorbed every word as readily as snow catches the firelight. Adults nodded knowingly, recognizing age-old themes: courage against the relentless winter, unwavering loyalty to family, and the delicate boundary between the mortal and the divine. Yet these weren't static, ancient relics. They were living stories, evolving with each retelling. A seasoned storyteller might subtly adapt a tale to reflect recent community events, celebrate a local hero, or even playfully tease someone present in the room. This adaptability is something I genuinely admire. The Vikings understood that history wasn't a fixed record. It was a dynamic conversation between the past and the present, continually shaped by the needs and experiences of the living. Storytelling during Joel served an even deeper purpose, too. It instilled in the community a powerful sense of belonging to something far greater than themselves. In the isolating grip of deep winter, when morale could easily erode, these sagas wove everyone together into a shared, mythic universe. They cemented core values, preserved collective memory, and ignited hope. In my view, it's no mere coincidence that cultures with robust oral traditions often cultivate remarkable resilience. From within its protected confines, defenders could loose arrows through narrow arrow slits, pour a variety of substances from the murder holes above, and drop heavy projectiles from concealed ledges. The geometry was nothing short of brilliant. Narrow enough to bottleneck enemy forces, tall enough to facilitate devastating vertical attack angles, and winding enough to disorient and confuse anyone charging forward in the fray. Trapdoors served a similar, equally insidious purpose. Some were straightforward wooden panels that could be swiftly opened, plunging unwitting enemies into deep pits below. Others were cunningly disguised beneath layers of straw, loose dirt, or even decorative flooring, blending seamlessly into the surroundings. The primary objective was not always immediate kill. It was often to separate, delay, or thoroughly disorient attackers, disrupting their momentum and cohesion. Imagine sprinting into a castle hallway, adrenaline surging, only for the ground beneath your feet to suddenly vanish. It was chaotic, utterly humiliating, and exceptionally effective. What I personally find most captivating about these features is their profound psychological impact. Even seasoned, skilled soldiers would hesitate before venturing into a castle's inner passages. They'd instinctively glance upward, tentatively tap the floor with a spear, or hug the walls to avoid real or imagined traps. This psychological dread alone could significantly slow an assault, purchasing invaluable time for the defenders. Murder holes and trapdoors were not merely gruesome. They were strategic masterpieces that transformed the castle itself into a formidable weapon. They allowed a relatively small contingent of defenders to repel dozens, or even hundreds of attackers. In a world where manpower was a precious commodity and sieges were notoriously brutal, such an advantage could literally spell the difference between survival and utter annihilation. There were no frigid corners, no isolated, awkward nooks, and no darker, subtly suspicious areas, unlike the often uneven environments found in log cabins. The entire volume of the space was uniformly warmed by the efficient convection system generated between the inner lining and the outer cover. This brilliant design meant that no one was ever compelled to endure sleeping in the dreaded drafty zone, also infamously known as the spot European settlers typically assigned to their least favorite family members. Hooks, strategically placed poles, and lines allowed belongings to be stored with remarkable efficiency along the interior walls. Tools, clothing, personal bags, cooking implements, every item had its designated place. Even ingenious drying racks for wet gear could be suspended from the upper poles, cleverly capitalizing on the naturally rising warm air. A tipi possessed the remarkable ability to seamlessly transform between a living room, a bedroom, a workshop, a kitchen, and a vibrant gathering hall, all without ever feeling the slightest bit cramped. But the true magic, the profound genius, lay in how the very structure inherently supported and amplified social connection. The pervasive warmth invited intimate conversation. The perfectly circular shape actively encouraged participation from everyone. The expansive, open space effortlessly accommodated cherished rituals, compelling storytelling, vital teaching moments, joyous singing, and hearty laughter, all while the tempestuous storm outside raged with the dramatic intensity of an angry opera singer. A winter teepee was far more than just a mere shelter. It was a living, breathing community space. It was a sanctuary where families didn't merely survive the biting cold. They didn't just exist within its walls. They lived a vibrant life inside. They possess an innate understanding of how to transform fear into narrative, and narrative into an indomitable strength. Thus, as the wind howled outside and snow piled against the longhouse walls, the Vikings found solace and warmth in words, rightly believing that stories held the power to outshine even the most profound darkness. While Joel was undeniably a period of vibrant feasting and revelry, at its spiritual core, it remained a solemn observance. The Vikings perceived winter not merely as a seasonal change, but as a monumental cosmic event, one that demanded profound acknowledgement from both humanity and the gods. And, frankly, this worldview resonates deeply with me. When you inhabit a land where the sun practically vanishes for weeks, you can't help but feel the immense weight of the cosmos in your very bones. Central to Joel was the pervasive belief that the sun itself was in peril. Each progressively shorter day was seen as a grave sign that the forces of darkness, frost giants, chaotic spirits, cosmic entropy, were relentlessly gaining dominance. The rituals of Joel, particularly those performed during the solstice, were powerful attempts to aid the sun in reclaiming its vital strength. Torches, towering bonfires, and the intimate flames of the hearth weren't merely sources of warmth. They were potent symbolic beacons, tiny earthly echoes of the celestial fire the Vikings fervently hoped would soon return. Communities gathered to offer heartfelt prayers, precious food, and vital drink to the gods, especially Odin, Thor, and Freya. Odin was invoked for his profound wisdom and protection, Thor for his immense strength against the crushing cold, and Freya for the promise of fertile lands once spring inevitably returned. Personally, I find it fascinating how seamlessly Viking spiritual life merged practicality with deep myth. In short, medieval castles were designed not to play fair, and that was precisely their genius. While the formidable walls and soaring towers of a castle offered robust protection against external armies, many medieval lords harbored a far more insidious fear, threats originating from within their own stronghold. A castle was, in essence, a bustling, self-contained ecosystem, a microcosm teeming with servants, cooks, blacksmiths, cleaners, knights, visiting nobles, wandering musicians, clergy, merchants, messengers, stable boys, and even prisoners. This diverse population meant one terrifying truth. If someone inside desired to sabotage the fortress, they possessed an almost limitless array of opportunities. And candidly, I believe this internal danger was often far more terrifying than any siege engine parked menacingly outside the main gate. Guards were meticulously trained not only to scan the surrounding forests for approaching enemies, but also to detect suspicious behavior within the very halls they patrolled. A servant lingering where they had no business being, a scribe suddenly showing an unusual interest in guard rotations, a visiting merchant asking an excessive number of questions. These were all potential red flags. Even seemingly trusted retainers were susceptible to bribery by rival lords. Medieval politics, after all, made modern office gossip seem utterly charming and benign in comparison. Consequently, guards patrolled the interior of castles with the same rigorous vigilance they applied to the exterior. They meticulously monitored storerooms, checked the integrity of locks, inspected the stables, and ensured that no one tampered with the vital wells or crucial food supplies. Poisoning, a silent and deadly threat, was a very real and persistent fear. Some lords even employed dedicated food tasters, a role which, if you ask me, must have been among the most nerve-wracking jobs in the entirety of the Middle Ages. Then there were the prisoners. Among the winter teepee's many marvels, its aerodynamic form, ingenious smoke ventilation, and unparalleled buffalo hide insulation, one achievement often goes unsung: the floor. Unlike the frigid earth outside, where inhabitants might shiver and shuffle like unwilling penguins, the tipi's floor was a meticulously engineered system of comfort and insulation. It transformed frozen soil into a genuinely warm and welcoming surface, even when temperatures plummeted to a bone-chilling -30 degrees Celsius. This remarkable feat was, by any measure, a small miracle. The groundwork for this ingenious system began with a foundational layer of brush, dried grass, or woven mats. This essential base served as a critical barrier, creating an immediate separation between the cold, damp earth and the interior living space. Functioning much like a diplomatic buffer zone, it skillfully mediated between the relentless chill of the ground and the warmth required for human comfort, preventing the freezing soil from waging a silent war on inhabitants' feet. Crucially, placing these organic layers directly onto the earth also combated the insidious problem of moisture wicking upwards, a vital function, as few winter experiences are more miserable than finding one's bedding unexpectedly saturated and heavy. Above this protective base, layers of animal hides, particularly thick buffalo robes or supple deer hides, were meticulously arranged. These weren't merely decorative. They offered a dual benefit of both profound warmth and remarkable softness, a dramatic improvement over the hard, unforgiving floors typical of European cabins from the same period. Even in contemporary times, the sensation of stepping onto a plush fur surface on a biting cold morning evokes a sense of indulgence. Yet, within the tipi, this wasn't indulgence. It was survival elevated with an undeniable elegance. These layered hides cleverly formed an insulating pocket, a concept akin to modern thermal flooring designs. They directed their prayers to the very powers that controlled the essential elements they needed most: warmth, sustenance, and the safety of their clan. In such an unforgiving environment, faith wasn't a luxury. It was an indispensable survival strategy. The solstice night itself thrummed with a heavy, almost electric atmosphere. People gazed intently at the sky, acutely listening for omens, convinced that the veil between worlds grew exceptionally thin during Joel. Some anticipated visits from their ancestral spirits. Others believed the gods themselves rode across the night sky in the terrifying wild hunt, a stormy procession that could either bestow blessings or strike terror, depending on one's fortune. And honestly, if you've ever experienced a violent northern winter storm outdoors, you can truly grasp why they conjured images of supernatural riders on the wind. It feels utterly otherworldly. When the solstice finally passed and the sun began its slow, subtle resurgence of strength, the community's mood noticeably shifted. This turning point marked a profound psychological victory. The worst had finally passed. The light was unequivocally returning. The offerings, prayers, and intricate rituals had not only honored the gods, they had steadfastly sustained the community through the deep mental darkness of winter. In this profound sense, Joel was far more than simple worship. It was a potent festival of resilience, a poignant reminder that even in the deepest, most pervasive night, renewal was already inexorably on its way. Beyond the solemn sacrifices, captivating storytelling, and sacred rituals, Joel was also a precious time for simple, profound human joy games, the exchange of gifts, and the vital strengthening of bonds within the clan. And frankly, I believe this represents one of the most consistently underrated aspects of Viking culture. We often envision them as grim, stoic warriors, trudging through snow with axes firmly in hand. Many castles maintained dungeons or secure holding cells deep within their stone structures. Guards bore the critical responsibility of ensuring no one passed contraband to captives, that no bribes exchanged hands, and that no sympathetic servant facilitated an escape. A single loose brick or a smuggled tool could quickly precipitate a disaster. Servants, paradoxically, were both indispensable and inherently risky. They enjoyed access to almost every room, including the lord's most private quarters. While many were steadfastly loyal, such loyalty could waver under the pressures of hunger, fear, or the lure of a more tempting offer. In my estimation, this is the aspect of medieval life we romanticize the least, yet it's the one we should endeavor to understand the most. Castles functioned because hundreds of individuals cooperated, yet any one of them possessed the potential to become a catastrophic vulnerability. Information security proved just as crucial as physical security. Guards strictly enforced rules regarding who could overhear council meetings, who was permitted to handle correspondence, and who was allowed to approach the Lord during his hours of rest. Even seemingly innocuous gossip, if overheard by the wrong person, could ignite a full-blown rebellion. Internal security was certainly not glamorous. There were no epic battles or heroic last stands. Instead, it comprised constant vigilance and a quiet, ever-present suspicion. However, without it, castles would have undoubtedly fallen far more frequently. For sometimes, the deadliest enemy required no siege tower, just a disarming smile, a well-placed bribe, or a perfectly timed opportunity. And personally, I find that to be the most unsettling truth of all. For all the magnificent architecture, formidable weaponry, intricate routines, and strict protocols, the true, beating heart of castle security resided in the guards themselves, the men who lived each day perched on the razor's edge of danger. Warm air, naturally descending from the central hearth, circulated gently across these floor layers, ensuring that the spaces beneath sleeping areas remained remarkably cozy and inviting. This was far beyond simply better than cold ground. It was a truly enveloping warmth, the kind that allowed occupants to sit and relax in genuine comfort, even as the world outside waged its fiercest assault as a frozen wasteland. Beyond comfort and insulation, the tipi floor boasted remarkable flexibility, a testament to its adaptive genius. Should circumstances shift, whether more individuals joined the dwelling, the weather worsened unexpectedly, or internal storage required rearrangement, the hide layers could be swiftly reconfigured. Sleeping areas could be effortlessly expanded or reduced, and supplementary furs added for enhanced insulation. Far from being a rigid, static component, the floor adapted with the same fluid efficiency as the tipi structure itself. Moreover, this design offered significant practical hygiene benefits. Inevitably, snow or mud would be tracked inside, and let's be honest, someone always tracks something in. When this occurred, the hides could be promptly lifted, shaken clean, thoroughly wiped, or carefully dried near the warmth of the central fire. Imagine attempting such a swift and simple cleanup with a fixed colonial wooden floor. Spoiler alert, the results would be far less accommodating. Ultimately, the tipi's intricate floor system functioned in perfect harmony with its overall thermal design. The upward currents of heat from the central hearth, the deep insulation provided by the layered hides, and the carefully managed airflow orchestrated by the inner lining all converged to shield the family from the brutal, external cold. But during Joel, they wholeheartedly allowed themselves to be playful, openly generous, and even genuinely sentimental. Inside the longhouse, once the feasting settled into a warm, contented hum, families turned to various forms of entertainment. Some were fiercely competitive. Wrestling matches, strategic board games like Nefatafel, and strength tests that allowed young men to showcase their prowess after a few horns of mead. Others were purely humorous, crafted specifically to elicit hearty laughter during a season when emotional warmth was just as crucial as physical heat. Children chased each other joyfully around the hearth. Adults playfully teased one another, and even the elders joined in, their faces crinkling with knowing smiles. In my opinion, these moments of levity reveal far more about the true nature of Viking resilience than any epic saga of battle. They steadfastly refused to let winter steal their essential humanity. Gift-giving was another cherished part of the celebration. Unlike the often lavish modern holiday rituals, Viking gifts were typically practical and purposeful. Carved wooden toys for children, warm woolen mittens, essential new tools, decorative ornaments, or simple charms believed to offer protection. Occasionally, a beautifully crafted knife or a piece of intricate jewelry might change hands, but the underlying meaning of the gift held far greater importance than the object itself. Gifts symbolized profound appreciation, steadfast loyalty, and the vital reaffirmation of the bonds upon which the clan's very survival depended. Honestly, I find this approach to gift-giving considerably healthier than what we often practice today. Vikings weren't striving to impress. They were striving to deepen and strengthen relationships. There was also a charming tradition known as elf blot, where families thoughtfully left out food or drink for household spirits, elves or landvetter, who were believed to guard the home. Their very existence was predicated upon discipline, sharp instinct, and unwavering trust in one another. And honestly, I believe this crucial human element is far too often overlooked. Stone walls alone did not protect a castle. It was the people within them who did. The walls were, ultimately, only as strong as the steadfast guards standing upon them. Life as a castle guard demanded an acceptance of a strange and taxing balance. Long, monotonous stretches of mind-numbing routine punctuated by sudden, terrifying moments of absolute chaos. One day, a guard might find themselves pacing the courtyard, utterly bored, observing chickens and gossiping servants. The very next day, the alarm horns could be blaring, arrows raining down, and every split-second decision they made determined who would live and who would perish. This intense emotional whiplash forged guards into practical, sharp-witted survivors. Camaraderie was not merely beneficial, it was absolutely essential for survival. Guards depended on each other with the same intensity that sailors rely on their crewmates. You quickly learned who remained calmest under extreme pressure, who possessed the keenest eyes for danger, who could crack a joke to diffuse tension, and who might succumb to panic during a crisis. In my view, this profound bond was one of the few things that rendered the job bearable. You were never truly alone on those imposing walls. You had brothers in arms beside you. Their rigorous training reflected this harsh reality. Guards drilled constantly, meticulously practicing formations, rehearsing swift alarm responses, reviewing critical escape routes, and testing the efficacy of their weapons. Some castles even staged elaborate mock invasions to simulate surprise attacks, preparing their garrisons for the unpredictable. Others placed a strong emphasis on communication drills, perfecting horn signals, torch patterns, and the precise cadence of shouted commands. Thus, even as the relentless winds sought to transform the vast plains into a frozen battlefield, those within the teepee enjoyed the profound comfort of warm ground, proving unequivocally that superior design consistently triumphs over brute environmental force. Yet, amidst the teepee's many impressive attributes, its consistent warmth, its ingenious smoke ventilation, or its graceful ability to withstand -30-degree temperatures, the true revelation lay elsewhere. The real plot twist, the truly astonishing feature, was its absolute portability. This wasn't portable in the frustrating, assembly-required sense often claimed by modern furniture, which frequently leads to instant regret. The teepee was genuinely portable, effortlessly dismantled, efficiently packed, easily transported, and rapidly reassembled. In essence, it embodied every quality a traditional European cabin conspicuously lacked. A family well-versed in the practice could dismantle their teepee in less than an hour, executing the process with remarkable precision. Poles were swiftly unlashed, the heavy hide covering meticulously folded, the interior lining carefully packed, and all household items efficiently bundled. There were no stubborn nails to pry, no cumbersome beams to wrestle, and certainly no roofs prone to collapsing mid-process. This design implicitly understood a fundamental truth often overlooked by European settlers. Human existence is dynamic. People move, animal herds migrate, seasons inexorably shift, and vital food sources relocate. Therefore, a truly effective home, the teepee asserted, should adapt seamlessly to life's ebb and flow, rather than tethering its inhabitants to a single, static location. Once disassembled, the entire collection of teepee components was efficiently transported using a travois, a deceptively simple yet remarkably effective sled-like frame. In earlier eras, these were typically pulled by dogs, later by horses after their introduction. Whether people genuinely expected invisible beings to consume the offerings or simply wished to make a symbolic gesture of gratitude, the practice fostered a powerful sense of harmony between the human world and the unseen forces that surrounded them. I personally adore this concept. It beautifully illustrates how the Vikings acknowledged that survival was never achieved in isolation, not even by humans. In the end, Joel's games and gifts weren't minor side activities. They were powerful emotional glue, reminding the community that while winter might be harsh and unrelenting, life still held abundant sweetness, humor, and companionship. In the darkest season, kinship itself became a powerful, radiant light. Among all the powerful symbols of Joel, fire burned brightest, both literally and spiritually. The Vikings understood fire as far more than a mere source of heat. It was a living, breathing presence, a formidable guardian against the encroaching darkness that relentlessly dominated their long winters. And truthfully, I believe they were onto something profoundly wise. Anyone who has ever sat by a fire on a truly cold night knows that its warmth feels as emotional as it does physical. It lifts the human spirit in a way nothing else quite can. During Joel, individual households and entire communities ignited magnificent fires, intentionally meant to echo the imminent rebirth of the sun. Torches were carried in solemn processions. Hearths were generously fed with fresh logs, and in some regions, a massive Yule log, often an entire tree trunk, was kept burning for days on end. Keeping the flame alive symbolized both unwavering endurance and vital continuity. If the fire survived the longest nights, so too would the people. Personally, I deeply appreciate this symbolism. It elevates the simple, primal act of staying warm into a collective, defiant declaration of hope. The Yule log itself was imbued with multiple layers of meaning. The overarching goal was straightforward. When chaos inevitably struck, no one should hesitate, and no one should misinterpret a vital order. In an era without modern radios, crystal-clear clarity was paramount. But beneath the hardened discipline, there always pulsed an undercurrent of fear. Every guard knew that the castle could be attacked at any moment, before dawn, during a bustling festival, while the Lord was away, or even in the quiet middle of dinner. And not all threats manifested as enemy armies. Fires, devastating disease outbreaks, crippling famines, and treacherous political betrayals could destabilize a castle from within just as effectively as battering rams could from without. Personally, I believe medieval guards inhabited a perpetual state of controlled anxiety, always scanning, always listening, always mentally preparing for the worst possible scenario. Yet, despite the inherent danger and relentless strain, these castle guards cultivated a rare sense of stability in a world that seldom offered any. Their unyielding vigilance kept families safe, protected invaluable resources, and upheld the fragile sense of order that medieval society desperately needed to endure. They were not celebrated knights. They were not hailed as heroic figures. But without their tireless dedication, castles would have been nothing more than beautiful stone sculptures, patiently waiting to collapse. In the final analysis, castle guards lived precariously on a razor's edge, but they steadfastly held the line, day after day, night after night. And it was that unshakable, unsung dedication that truly sustained the medieval world. Before the sun had even begun to cast its first rays over the rooftops of the Suburra, Rome's bustling, poorer districts were already teeming with life. Wooden shutters clattered open, vendors laboriously dragged their carts onto the uneven stone streets, and the lingering scent of yesterday's charcoal fires hung heavy in the morning air. Demonstrating another layer of its brilliant economy, the Tipi poles themselves often served a dual purpose, functioning as the travois' primary rails. This ingenious detail underscored a core principle of Tipi construction. Every single element possessed multiple uses. Nothing was extraneous. Nothing existed solely for decoration. Every part served a vital, practical purpose. In stark contrast, European settlers of the period were frequently engaged in the labor-intensive task of felling entire forests to construct wooden houses. Dwellings they often abandoned within a year, having poorly chosen their initial building sites. However, the truly distinguishing characteristic of the tipi was its unparalleled speed of reassembly. The very same family capable of dismantling it in under an hour could have their entire home standing proudly again by midday. Poles meticulously arranged, the hide covering securely fastened, the interior lining carefully hung, and a small fire already warming the hearth. Imagine the sheer efficiency of relocating your entire dwelling in less time than it takes most individuals to painstakingly assemble a single piece of flat-pack furniture, and without the accompanying emotional distress. Mobility, for the plains people, was never a luxury. It was an absolute imperative, essential to the fundamental rhythm of their existence. Hunting patterns, the relentless progression of seasons, the fluctuating availability of water, and critical resource cycles all necessitated constant movement. The Tipi liberated families to follow the bounty of the land without ever compromising on comfort. There was no agonizing choice between warmth and mobility, no absurd task of attempting to drag a ponderous wooden cabin across vast plains like a particularly stubborn, uncooperative pet. The Tipi offered an elegantly simple solution. Your home moved in seamless harmony with you, never in opposition. Some believed it powerfully protected the home from misfortune. Others thought the sparks ascending heavenward carried blessings directly to the gods. Families meticulously saved ashes from the burnt log to scatter in their fields, convinced it would guarantee fertile soil and bountiful harvests in spring. Even when viewed through a modern lens, there's something truly beautiful about connecting winter rituals to the promise of future harvests. It vividly demonstrates how the Vikings intertwined every moment, whether dark or bright, with the continuous, sacred cycle of life. Fire also served to create a potent boundary between the ordinary and the sacred. As flames flickered hypnotically against the longhouse walls, casting shifting, dancing shapes in the smoke, people believed the veil between worlds grew thinner. Ancestors might draw near, wandering spirits might linger, and the gods themselves might watch unseen from within the luminous glow. And honestly, on a long winter night filled with the howl of the wind and the crackling of ice, I can easily imagine how readily the mind might slip into that mystical space. Firelight possesses a unique ability to make the world feel simultaneously smaller and infinitely larger. These fires, whether humble hearth flames or towering bonfires, represented the Vikings' determined effort to confront the darkness with light, not passively, but actively, almost defiantly. They couldn't control the sun's eventual return, but they could create their own light. And in many profound ways, that simple act encapsulates the very essence of human resilience. When the world grows dark, we build a flame, and we decide, unequivocally, to endure. For the plebeians, the laborers, porters, washerwomen, scribes, and freedmen, the market was no mere luxury. It was the essential hub where they acquired their food for the day, a necessity driven by the stark reality that almost no one possessed adequate storage space at home. And frankly, I think this single fact illuminates everything about daily Roman life. Survival was a perpetual daily negotiation. The bread sellers were always the earliest to open. The moment their ovens released the first batch of round, warm loaves, customers would immediately crowd around, some still in the process of tying their tunics, others clutching a solitary bronze coin that would determine if they ate that morning. Nearby, fruit vendors meticulously arranged vibrant piles of figs, dates, and olives on rough-hewn wooden boards. Nothing was washed, nothing polished. Rome embraced practicality over presentation. If it was edible, someone would buy it. The market's cacophony rapidly intensified. Young boys shrieked prices at the top of their lungs. Women haggled with such aggressive fervor that it often sounded like a heated argument, and a medley of animals bleated, snarled, or clucked, depending on the stall one passed. Mingled within this sensory maelstrom were the ubiquitous pickpockets, small, agile, and utterly fearless. Personally, I believe Roman markets served as a more effective training ground for thieves than any criminal academy ever could. One moment you might be admiring a cluster of fresh grapes, and the next your purse was inexplicably gone. Water sellers navigated the crowded lanes with sloshing buckets, a service made necessary by the fact that public street fountains were not always reliable or safe. The vast city, with its leaking pipes and constant contamination, meant that clean drinking water was often a gamble. This remarkable portability also served to profoundly strengthen community bonds. Camps had the inherent flexibility to easily coalesce, expand, merge, or divide according to seasonal needs or communal decisions. Families could readily participate in vital seasonal gatherings, spiritual ceremonies, or large-scale hunts, secure in the knowledge that their dwellings could be swiftly packed and ready for relocation at a moment's notice. In a challenging world defined by the expansive and often unforgiving vastness of the plains, the Tipi's mobility transcended mere convenience. It was quite simply survival elegantly streamlined. Shifting focus, if you've ever endured living in a dwelling with a poorly sealed front door, you understand how a single, persistent draft can utterly undermine an entire heating system. Now, amplify that sensation exponentially, imagining a relentless draft at a brutal -30 degrees Celsius, with the wind aggressively assaulting you sideways as if personally affronted by your very presence. The entrance of a winter teepee was designed to contend with precisely these extreme conditions, and it did so with a quiet, confident brilliance that offers profound lessons for even contemporary architects. The initial and perhaps most fundamental line of defense for the teepee's entrance was its strategic orientation. Traditionally, teepees were meticulously positioned to face east, deliberately turning their backs on the prevailing western winds, those formidable gusts that barreled across the vast plains with the overwhelming subtlety of an enraged grizzly bear. This precise positioning was no mere superstition. It represented a sophisticated form of meteorology, practiced with deep empirical understanding long before modern meteorologists appeared on television to dramatically gesticulate at animated weather maps. Cheap wine, remarkably, frequently proved safer than water, which goes a long way in explaining why so many Romans were seen walking around with a slight buzz even before noon. Every single sense was assaulted: the metallic clang of cups, the incessant barking of vendors, the rich, savory smell of frying fish or roasting nuts, and the acrid sting of smoke from charcoal braziers created an overwhelming experience. Rome was never quiet, never truly still. Yet, beneath the apparent chaos, there was an underlying rhythm, a strange order that only locals genuinely understood. Everyone had their preferred stall, their trusted cellar, their ingrained daily routine. And for the plebeians, the market transcended a mere shopping destination. It was where news disseminated, gossip flourished, alliances were subtly forged, and life unfolded, one noisy morning at a time. In a city housing 1 million souls, the market functioned as its beating heart, a vital organ that began pumping vigorously even before the sun considered making its ascent. If the sprawling open-air stalls represented the lungs of the Roman market, then the tabernae were undoubtedly its stomach. Narrow, perpetually smoky, always packed and resoundingly loud. These diminutive street shops, each barely large enough to accommodate a counter, a few clay jars, and a very sweaty owner shouting above the din of customers, lined major roads and winding alleyways throughout the city. Honestly, I'd contend that Rome essentially invented fast food culture centuries before modern cities ever conceived of it, simply substituting plastic wrappers for humble wooden bowls and soda for cheap, diluted wine. Inside a taberna, patrons would discover food that was hot, unpretentious, and reliably filling. Hearty lentil stews, sizzling grilled sausages, briny olives, fried fish, wholesome chickpea porridge, leftover cuts of meat simmering in a rich wine sauce, or flatbread generously sprinkled with aromatic herbs. By consistently facing east, the teepee significantly minimized its exposure to the most aggressive wind assaults, effectively transforming what could have been a relentless wind tunnel into a carefully controlled and secure point of entry. The vast majority of plebeians lacked kitchens in their homes. No ovens, no dedicated space, sometimes not even a proper hearth. Consequently, street food wasn't an occasional treat. It was an absolute necessity for survival. A day without a taberna meal typically meant a day without eating at all. The aroma was the first thing to hit you. The distinct smell of smoke emanating from charcoal braziers, mingling with garlic oil, and the slightly disquieting scent of fish that frankly should have been sold yesterday. Personally, I'm quite certain that Roman food safety standards would induce an immediate heart attack in any modern health inspector. But Romans, it seems, possessed iron stomachs, or at least they were remarkably adept at pretending to. The vinum, or cheap wine, was ubiquitous. Served in rustic clay cups from massive amphorae, it was almost universally diluted, often flavored with herbs or sweetened with honey. Pure, unwatered wine was deemed barbaric, fit only for celts or confirmed drunkards. Nevertheless, taberna wine was notorious for its low quality, frequently fermented for too long or adulterated with dubious additives. Yet, for a few coins, it offered a welcome warmth to the chest and a fleeting respite from the anxieties of living in a noisy tenement that might unexpectedly collapse at any moment. Honestly, who could genuinely blame them for seeking such solace?